the advertising and billboard.
All right, we have reached the 9 o'clock hour, and we're going to get started here this morning. So I want to welcome panel members and our collaborators. I'm excited that we're back here again. This is becoming a really regular thing here, right? To continue our conversations around this important issue. I want to reiterate the goal for the panel and our meetings moving forward is by the end of the process that we're able to establish pathway recommendations that create an educated and talented workforce able not just to meet the needs of business and higher education, but are able to succeed, that our students are able to succeed in all post-secondary endeavors. At our last meeting, we discussed data from the Commission on Higher Education regarding college readiness and how our high school graduates are not prepared in some cases for the rigors of higher ed. This week we'll discuss data from the Indiana Chamber regarding our students' need to be better prepared to meet the demands of the workforce. These reports, I believe, keep us grounded in the data around student success. Ultimately, our goal would be for all students leading successful lives after they graduate from high school, and we need to have pathways that help guide them to get there. I'm also excited today that we're going to also look at some research conducted by Kappa Delta Pi. Today we'll learn about some modern approaches and how other countries prepare their students for success in the 21st century, or what I would call now going to the 21st and one-half century. The other thing that I wanted to real quickly in the beginning here is just return to our statutory purpose and authorization. I know I have had conversations with folks, and I know we've been hearing that there are those confused about purpose and intention of the panel, and whether we're creating alternatives to ECAs or creating a new graduation qualifying exam, or what from that standpoint. Since we have two legislators on the panel who can clarify any questions we may have around that purpose, putting you on the spot here, I want to ask if there's any questions from panel members or collaborators about that. Okay, good. So I want to then just give my understanding so that we're out there on that. I understand the purpose of the panel is to create a new system for determining if a student is ready to graduate high school. In the past, we've used graduating qualifying exams such as ECAs, I-STEP, to determine this. However, under the new legislation, we can establish different pathways or ways to determine graduation for our students. The legislation gives us some options to consider, but none of those we have to use. Correct?
I would, if you go to your booklets, if you go to the bill, House Bill 1003 actually has been included in your packet. And go to page 27 on that, and you go to subsection C, where it says, State Board shall establish graduation pathway requirements under subsection B1 in consultation with the Department of Workforce Development and the Commission for Higher Education. A graduation pathway requirement may include the following options approved by the State Board. I want to reiterate, may approve. Number one, end of course assessments measuring academic standards. Number two, international baccalaureate exams. Number three, nationally recognized college entrance exams. Number four, advanced placement exams. Number five, assessments necessary to receive college credit for dual credit courses. Six, industry recognized certificates. Seven was the Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery. And eight, any other pathway approved by the State Board. So it is clear that, and I believe Senator Cruz would validate this, the General Assembly wanted to defer any type of decision to State Board, and ECAs are not a default pathway. This is totally up to the decision of State Board. I know that it was my intent as author of the bill to try to drive us to moving to an approach rather than having to take tests and remediate, test and remediate, and test again, is to really provide opportunities for students that would be more, we want to have the same rigor and the same assessment in terms of making sure that they're college and career ready, but give alternative ways of assessing that. And one of the other things that I would say that I was very excited about in terms of the alternatives are that the state is not setting cut scores. And most of, if not all of these are all determined, cut scores are determined by outside agencies or groups like certification. So the state of Indiana is not saying for Indiana students you have to hit this benchmark, but it's a national organization that's setting that these are benchmarks that are necessary to be successful. So that is really what the intent was, and it's, like I said, I just want to make sure that we're very clear that ECAs are on the table to be considered, but are not mandatory. It's totally up to this group and technically the state board to make that final approval as to how they move forward with that.
Just to clarify, Representative Aney, can you cover what's required testing though in iLearn 3 or in iLearn, please? Just to make sure there's no confusion on
ECAs are
and what's required testing.
Sure. ECAs are required to meet our federal accountability standards, and that is really and iLearn 3 also is going to require 3 through 8. We have to comply with federal law. So, but ECAs, the federal law does not require a graduation qualification exam. The state of Indiana requires that, and the General Assembly discussed whether or not we wanted to remove that, and it was a decision by majority of members that we spend $8 billion a year investing in K-12 education, and we wanted to make sure that we are verifying that our students have are college or career ready. And so yes, ECAs are required to be administered.
Can they still be a pathway potential?
They could be if the state board, but it is not a default. It is not determined. The only thing is ECAs have to be taken because of federal law. And as you know, federal law says you have to take an assessment in secondary for math and language arts and science. And so we do have biology 1, algebra 1, and the English language arts. But those are federal requirements. There's no requirement that they have to pass it. The state law requires the passage of it, had required passage of it for graduation. With 1003, we removed that and said these other pathways could be alternatives or could be a pathway rather than ECAs.
But the passage goes into accountability. So I want to make that clear. The passage of ECAs for those students who are taking ECAs at the high school level still goes into accountability. So I want to make sure that that doesn't get muddied because, I mean, it gets very confusing.
Well, you have to remember too, Superintendent, that federal accountability, state accountability are two different models. So federal accountability also requires graduation. And
right.
so we can, and state board has the authority to determine weighting and all of that. So those all
I just want to
an
make
effect.
sure folks knew ECA had more of a purpose than just the conversation we're having today.
It does. It has a purpose today for accountability. It doesn't have to have that purpose in the future for accountability. That would be up to the state to determine whether we want to continue ECAs. But today, ECAs do definitely. Well, actually, today it's ISTEP 10. In 1819 it would be ECAs, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So for our purpose, really, we're looking at creating new ways to determine if students are ready for college.
Correct, and I think that, I think it's really been a step forward, a positive step forward. The General Assembly recognizes that not all students, well, number one, that an assessment doesn't necessarily indicate that you're ready for college or career, that really there are other ways that you can make sure that you validate that those skills are there and they're prepared for it. And that's really why we put this together in that way.
Okay. And I think it's exciting as well that as we consider recommendations and what we've heard from collaborators, and these have been great conversations. Today we switched up the room a little bit and we've got everybody interweaved, both collaborators and panel members. I think it's important for us to learn, understand what gaps there are in our system, hearing about those and hearing the ideas and so forth. We've heard great things in the first two meetings from both higher education, from business and industry. We heard from students that was very insightful at the last meeting, and our parents as well. And then looking forward today to have the conversation with teachers and counselors and that part. And leading us up to that then, and that being said, I've asked Mike if he would please just to give us from the first two meetings, a high-level overview in your teacher voice today as well, please.
I'm allowed to look at my notes.
You're allowed to look at your notes, yes. But you got to be loud.
Scanning over, apologize for bringing back the room. Scanning over the notes that I've taken, trying my best to synthesize, pull together the key concepts. The things that I've heard a couple times, seem significant according to people in the room, is that there exists a gap between the knowledge and skills that students are coming out of high school with, and what the job market and in many ways human life and the world is requiring of them. And so trying to understand how we close that gap. What does that space for us look like? What are different ways that we can think about what we're trying to do to make people ready for the world, for their careers, and for college. In terms of principles of how we work and sort of laying the groundwork, something we've heard over and over is the need for flexibility, both in terms of understanding students' education as well as the system itself being able to flex as needed. One theme that I think we've heard over and over is that the world has changed, it's in motion. We're not trying to design something that we really even know what it is. Jobs are changing very quickly. We're imagining students 20 years out. If you look back for 20 years, you can see how much the world has changed in that time. Given the acceleration of that process, you have to imagine it would be pretty hard to prepare somebody for a job that we don't even know what it is yet. So given that, how do we inculcate flexible skills? What are those skills? What are employers actually looking for? One of the themes around that is that there is certainly the need for life skills in addition to types of education you might historically associate with physical education. So how does somebody actually learn to deal with some very practical things in life to make them ready for a job? Again, we don't even really know what it is yet. And balancing that flexibility with intent and rigor. And so that's one of the tensions, the creative tensions in a healthy way that's emerged. How do we make sure that the system that we're putting in place is both rigorous and intentional, and that we're not losing that while still offering these potential different pathways and flexibility for being in that position of readiness, either for college or for the types of training. And this is another distinction that was made. You don't expect to go on to college ready to do your job day one. You learn on the job after you. And so what are the frameworks we can put in place so that students and people are ready for that training when they're there? Overall, so there is that dynamic between flexibility and rigor. And really what this points to is a much more complex system that we need to put in place to be able to match the complexity that we're seeing in the future. So it's not this single pipeline of here comes a student who's a blank slate, we train them up, and now you're ready for the world. So how do we start to put in place something that matches the complexity of what the world is asking for? Another one of those realities really between structure, alignment, and boundaries. On the one hand, and responsiveness and minimalism fluidity. So sort of blowing out that same dynamic. How do we both make sure that there's rigor and structure and alignment and accountability? What types of assessment do we have? We have a more complex system of pathways. Another acknowledgement, you need to start very early. A lot of people have said this isn't something you can start to put in place in college. This is a system that needs redesign and reassessment much earlier than that. So really those three particular types of pathways that are skills that we talked about. Something previously referred to as soft skills, academic skills, and practical and career skills. And so how do we start to think about those skills in different ways? How do we value them? What does it actually mean to be prepared once you leave high school or leave college? What is the world asking for? What are colleges looking for? What are jobs looking for? these pathways, what is the lifetime value of those pathways, how do we value all equally, especially regionally in the state, what's it look like for one county versus another when those conditions are very different, how do we value equity, what are the measures and the rigor again, and then really how we value diversity of thought, and what is the communication that allows this whole system to function and be transparent. What is success? So I know Dr. Ernest mentioned that at the beginning. Considering the whole learning model, what does it mean? What is student success? What does preparedness actually mean? There you go. That's what I review.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. As you can see, we've had a lot of conversations around this thus far, and looking forward to another one today that forward-thinking, innovative, what's best for students and what's best for having those students be successful and reach work. That brings us now to our public comment portion of the meeting. We do have several, so I want to reiterate that we will be doing them in 3-minute intervals, and we're going to be strict on that today, so please prepare your comments accordingly, because we do want to hear from everybody that has signed up for that. We have an hour allotted for that portion of the meeting, and we want to make sure, and again, as is best practice for public comment, we want to, again, hear the public comments and listen and make sure that we get through those. So we will listen to those and not engage in conversations on those, because those are public comment. So with that, we will begin. We have a chair on this corner. If we could get, John, if you could move that mic over there so that they could have that. And please also, and I failed to say this at the beginning, please do talk close to your mic, because people do want to hear. And so that way, when you're talking, pull that mic up to you so that everyone can hear what we're saying, both from a panel and collaborator and our public comments. With that, we will begin.
Flora Reichenauer. My fault.
Good morning. My name is Flora Reichenauer, and I'm the Superintendent of Schools for MSD of Pike Township. I'm also a board member with the Indiana Urban School Association. Thank you for taking time this morning, spending on a very important task. The workplace is very different than when you and I were in high school, one that many of us might have never imagined. Global competition is our reality. A one-size-fits-all model no longer works, especially in education. The same concept is important when we're making decisions about our students, all students, who will become our future workforce. One size does not fit all. At Pike High School, we take seriously the role our students have in their last 4 years of school. We are ensuring that they are prepared for the global competitiveness that they will come upon. The Graduation Pathway Advisory Panel has an important opportunity to make a difference in our Indiana students. Students do not have the same needs or talents or interests, the very reason a one-size-fits-all model could not work. I consistently remind my school community of the importance of breaking down barriers to make a difference every day while opening doors of opportunity that sometimes our students don't realize for themselves. Each of you have this same opportunity to break down barriers by making sure that we have a carefully designed, comprehensive education system with world-class teachers, opportunities for our students to achieve, and a rigorous system of career and technical education. I asked the committee to develop graduation pathway requirements that allow local control and flexibility, high school students' options for their college and career pathways, and a single Indiana high school diploma with distinctions. Thank you for listening to me on behalf of Pike students like Ashante, one of Pike's advanced placement scholars and top 20 student who graduated with a culinary arts certification and studying at Vincennes to be an executive chef. For Sean, a member of our Pike's top 10 at Purdue, trying to find success in the aviation industry. Or Dante, our special needs student transitioning to the workforce with his general diploma. Naomi, with a full scholarship at Harvard, studying human development and biology. Lena, a recent Sagamore of the Wabash honoree and Pike Academic Scholar in Georgia on a track and field scholarship. Or Eduardo, a recent student technology intern preparing to join the Marines. Joy, our student with technical honors diploma and CNA certification at IU with plans to be a pediatrician. These and hundreds of other Pike graduates are the reason one size does not fit all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Adrian Schroyer.
Good morning. My name is Adrienne Schroyer, and I'm a guidance coordinator for Snyder High School with Fort Wayne Community Schools. We service a little over 1,900 students, so I'm the guidance coordinator with 4 counselors, and that is not an unusual ratio. So as a school counselor and a parent of 2 young men, I too want to ensure that my children, my students, and my children are prepared and independent. So I thank you for taking the time to invest in our students and their futures, because I know you're spending a lot of time on this topic, and I truly appreciate that. Pathways for students who struggle to pass the ECA is a concern of mine. The business community states that students entering the workforce are lacking soft skills, work ethic, interpersonal relationship skills, and over the last 17 years of my career, I've watched our focus shift to passing the test, and this has become the focus of our students, our families, our teachers, and our staff. And then, so it's no wonder that soft skills are lacking. There are no more interpersonal relationship skills classes offered, no adult roles and responsibilities classes, no wood shop, etc. So like I said, it's just no wonder that we have lost some of those skills, because the test is all that our students are thinking about. So when I was preparing for this, I had different thoughts on pathways, and then the mind map was actually up on my screen in my office when a student of mine came in that I had to talk to about the fact that he's taken the ECA 6 times and he still has not passed. And he hid the scores from his parents, so they called me to talk to him about that. And he has given up all of his elective options to retake this test, or to remediate, and for English and math every single year. He goes to summer school each year, gives up his summer to try to pass this test, and his scores actually are going down. So he feels defeated, and so I'm here actually to advocate for students like him, who his mother is a teacher and his father is a successful business owner. So he's coming from a background where education is important and promoted. And so I look at it and I turn to myself and think, this could be my own child, you know, that has this issue. That he told me in his words that the test is like a dark cloud hovering over his head for the last 4 years. So all that he thinks about is, I have to pass this test. He's a successful student at our Anthus Career Center, second-year student who will earn a state certification. And I had to tell him and remind him that the test does not define him or his success in life, and that's how he felt. So once I told him that, he was very thankful. And I talked to him about I would work with him to get him to graduate, and make sure that he does have that successful spot in our community.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Brian Wilson, Jasper High School.
Good morning, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak, and appreciate the service you put forth as a very important topic for our students. I am going to focus on my notes. I apologize for that, to focus my attention here in the 3 minutes. If multiple pathways to graduation focuses on the need for increased skills and career opportunities rather than solely increasing the rigor, then it could have a very positive impact on our students, I believe. Many students in our school increasingly value the benefit of relevant experiences such as health occupations, internships, CT and vocational courses. However, many students at the higher end of the scale often miss out on these opportunities due to they feel the need for increased AP courses to keep their GPA high on our weighted scale. Others lack the time in the day to take 2 to 4 periods out to take advantage of some of these opportunities. We do understand there's a need for increased highly skilled workers in the state. However, it seems to me that filling this need in part by increasing graduation requirements could be contradictory. About 90% of the students at Jasper High School attend college, most of them 4-year schools. Though statistics tell us that over 50% of them will drop out within 5 or 6 years. Rather than increasing the rigor for all students to receive a diploma, perhaps the focus should be on increasing opportunities for acquiring these skills in high school, while at the same time communicating to students and their parents especially the need and opportunity while they are in middle school. Many high school students seem to have it in their minds. Their minds are made up that they need to attend college, especially a 4-year school, to earn a good living. We know this isn't necessarily the case, as a really good plumber can make more money than a subpar attorney. In speaking with some of the larger employers in Du Bois County, specifically Jasper Engines and Masterbrand, many indicate that a general diploma is all that is needed as they can provide the necessary training for employees. Given that over a third of Du Bois County jobs are in manufacturing, and that in 2015 Du Bois County had the 3rd highest per capita personal income in the state, many of these jobs also provide a living wage. Employers tell us that they desire employees to enter the workforce with the necessary soft skills for success. Someone who works hard, is on time, and can work collaboratively with coworkers has the necessary skills to be trained and earn a good living. The higher the number of curricular requirements to receive a diploma, the fewer opportunities exist to provide students life and soft skills they may need for entry-level work. We work hard to prepare all of our students for any opportunity available, regardless of their diploma track. Finally, it would be a shame to eliminate or even devalue a general diploma. I can tell you about a recent student of ours who has special needs. It took him 5 years to graduate. With a general diploma, he needed a waiver, but he did pass one of the ECA exams. He was very proud to have earned his diploma and is currently working full-time in Jasper. He will be a productive member of our community. He is never going to attend college and be in need of remediation. However, he's valuable nonetheless. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Andy Allen, Batesville High School.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Andy Allen. I'm principal at Batesville High School, Batesville, Indiana, located down 74 in between Indianapolis and Cincinnati. We're a rural city of about 6,000 students, but we service about 20,000 individuals in our area. We are heavy in manufacturing and healthcare as the economic driver in our community. The conversations here around the pathway don't necessarily focus on academic honors and technical honors, and even to a certain level, Core 40. But it does focus on having kids that are ready as they leave Batesville High School or any high school in the state of Indiana to walk directly into the workforce or whatever they desire next. And so it's centered around discussions. It oftentimes goes back to the idea of achieving a general diploma, the value of a general diploma through experiences. And even that goes up into some of the Core 40 achievement areas where kids who get the Core 40 diploma but yet maybe leave Batesville High School or other high schools not exactly sure what they want to do next. And so we focus on experiences, and I ask this panel as they consider the one diploma requirement or change to allow for creativity and developing experiences for these students so when they leave our walls, they go right into the workforce with many of the skills that we all desire for them to have. To be clear, we prioritize graduation above all else, but we need to look at eliminating barriers to these experiences for Core 40 attainment, especially the idea of Algebra 2 as a math requirement. The definition of college and career readiness through experiences rather than a streamlined credit attainment is the future of Indiana high school diploma attainment, and it's something I encourage this panel to look for. Last week you heard from Caleb Pearson, the Batesville Cooperative Model, which is a very creative example of how we can pair the industry workforce with high school students. Caleb is a great spokesman for this program and did well up here. But I also would like to mention Luke, who is also a co-op student. Luke struggled to pass through the ECAs, but yet was in this model. Luke was a general diploma student, yet walked out of Batesville High School with 24 Ivy Tech credits in our partnership agreement with them. Received over 400 hours of co-op experience in a 2-year period through 3 local companies, and is now gainfully employed at Batesville Tool and Die and is finishing his associate's degree at Ivy Tech. That's a creative model that we were able to use with a student who would not have gone to Ivy Tech or any kind of college, yet as a general diploma. It is the value of creating these type of experiences. I urge you, when you looking at the model, to look at types of stackable experiences that can be in addition to the ECA. To be clear, we're not looking at not taking the ECA in algebra and in English, but these stackable experiences through mentorship opportunities in the juniors and senior year, a suite type of experience in an online hybrid model, combining preparing for college and careers and personal financial responsibility, and then also those stackable experiences develop the professional skills of getting targeted students outside the walls of our school into relevant academic opportunities in the local industry. This defines a true experience in preparing for career readiness ideas and is easily replicable in any community. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Rick Doss.
Good morning. My name is Rick Doss. I'm the Director of Secondary Education for Washington Township Schools in Indianapolis, and I want to thank you for the opportunity today. I'm going to be very brief because much of what I was going to say has been said already, but I think that we definitely need to consider flexibility. I think that as a district that serves kids who come from $1 million homes to kids who live in Section 8 housing. We are a very good profile of what the state of Indiana looks like. And we have more than 20% of our students are English language learners. And when those students, many of whom come from a refugee situation, when they land in our district as a 16-year-old, preparing them for life is really what we're targeting, as opposed to preparing them for the ECA, being proficient in geometry and second-year algebra. And while those are absolutely critical courses for a number of students, they're not necessarily applicable for the students that are landing with us at the time. So I just encourage you to be flexible as you consider this. We want to prepare kids for life. We absolutely agree with many of the options that have been discussed, and we just hope that you'll consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evan Brannigan.
Good morning. My name is Evan Brannigan III, and I'm principal of North Central High School and MSD of Washington Township. Most importantly, I'm a proud Hoosier, product of East Allen County Schools in Fort Wayne, Indiana, proud graduate twice over of Ball State University. At the school that I currently work at, 23 years in, and I have a lot to celebrate. I have a lot of families who I'm proud of, a lot of students who have overcome adversity. We're an AP school, IB school, dual credit through IU. We've got a lot to celebrate. But my purpose for speaking right now is for the students who struggle to graduate from North Central High School, who struggle to graduate with the ECA in math or English, the students who take the test 3, 4, 5 times. As you consider your work moving forward, please keep in mind those students. It's easy to celebrate our AP, IB, top 25, etc. But please keep in mind those students who have to go to remediation, those students who they will be the first in their family to graduate, those students who college right now for them is not a serious consideration, and they have to take into consideration what their next step is. You heard from Mr. Dawson a few minutes ago talking about the diversity of Washington Township schools, the $1 million homes down to Section 8 housing. Regardless of where these young people come from, somebody loves them. And I ask that as the committee looks forward in its efforts, what can we do to assist these students to accomplish goals, their individual goals? The word that you're going to hear common throughout your meeting, I'm sure, is flexibility. Please keep that in mind as you think about what we can do for our Hoosier graduates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Studebaker.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Jeff Studebaker. I am the superintendent of the Maryville Community School Corporation, an urban school corporation of about 6,500 students. Prior to that, I was the superintendent at the Clinton Central School Corporation, a small rural corporation of just under 1,000 students. I have 4 children, the oldest of whom is a Purdue graduate and a chemical engineer in Georgia, the youngest of whom is a 3.5-year-old daughter with Down syndrome. I'm giving you my background so you understand my perspective. I graduated from a small rural school here in Indiana. I have taught in a small private school, a small rural school, a large urban school, and have been a principal of a large urban school. I've served as a superintendent in both big and small schools, both urban and rural environments. These experiences, I feel, have given me a wide perspective and forms the basis of my testimony today. Those of us having discussions and making decisions regarding diploma types and pathways must keep in mind that we serve many different types of schools, many different types of students. Our mission is to prepare every single student to walk whatever path they are destined to walk. The children we serve all face the same issue of equitable access. No matter where a student may attend, they should have access to high quality and wide-ranging opportunities, and way too often, they don't. It shouldn't matter whether a student attends a small rural school or a large urban one. They should be able to get the education they need to walk their path. If a student has completed a plan of study, even a certificate of completion, that child should have gained a world-class, authentic education that has prepared them well. Every student, from the future engineer to the one with a significant disability, should have that opportunity. Local schools should have the flexibility to meet that challenge and the responsibility to do so as well. At Maryville, our transiency rate ranges anywhere from 17 to 20% each year. Many of our new students each year are coming to us from nearby school corporations that may not have a comparable array of opportunities for students as we are able to provide. Those students frequently come to us unprepared. And what of our students that move into one of those nearby school corporations? That disparity in opportunity, on its face, is wrong. We have to strive to reduce and remove the differences in opportunity and to provide flexibility to serve disadvantaged students when they arrive at our schools. Moving from one district to another should not impair a student's opportunity to succeed. No 2 students are the same. Our diploma options should reflect that. One Indiana diploma with a common group of classes and experiences coupled with multiple pathways at the end of their high school journey is a compelling idea. The model used in Ohio is close to the mark, perhaps. One Indiana diploma with levels of distinction could be our answer. This allows students to find a path to graduation that makes sense for all students and their schools. Thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts and perspectives, and good luck in your mission.
Thank you.
Beth Niedermeyer.
Good morning. My name is Beth Niedermeyer, and I'm the superintendent of Noblesville Schools in Hamilton County. We have over 10,000 students, and we have 55 different home languages represented. As our population continues to grow, we must continue to be vigilant and being responsive to our students' needs. And that's why I'm here today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the superintendents in Indiana, and I thank you for providing this forum for us to share our thoughts. I ask that you do not attach graduation to a single assessment, regardless of what it is. We favor multiple measures with various options and flexibilities that will assess high-level skills. Schools should not look the way they did 5 or 10 years ago because the world is vastly different today. At Noblesville Schools, we continue to reimagine our practices to stay relevant, which is no different than what businesses are doing today. It's time for Indiana to move away from one assessment that narrows and limits opportunities for students and allows district to use multiple measures that better gauge student success and college and career readiness. Another way to increase graduation pathways that I hope you'll consider is through offering a single high school diploma with distinctions. This would provide options for career and college pathways. We could honor this diploma in ways other than the official calculation and focus on meaningful courses, credentials, industry certifications, and supports, which would address the concerns that exist from the elimination of the general diploma. We had a student with significant medical needs and had to be hospitalized for treatment. His goal was to complete a Core 40 diploma, but his illness prevented him from doing so. But he did receive a general diploma, and it allowed him to graduate with his peers. As we look to increasing opportunities for students that prevent them that prepare them for a pathway to a college or career, I ask that you consider a flexible structure that allows students to take CTE courses that provide valuable skills aligned to workforce demands. The current approach is wasteful and punitive to students. We have to work to destigmatize career paths that require training different from a college degree. Thank you for your commitment to this important work and for considering recommendations from Indiana superintendents. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Lisa Lantrip.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Lantrip. I'm the superintendent of Southern Hancock County, and we border Marion County on the east side. And I've been following the conversation about multiple pathways or graduation pathways, as well as our developing ESSA plan. And I strongly believe that students need multiple pathways to a diploma. I do not believe that one shoe fits all of the needs of our students, our universities, the workforce, or the communities served by our school corporation. As we move forward in the creation of graduation pathways, I hope that you consider the child and create opportunities for all children to choose a path that best meets their needs and interests, while also preparing them for their future career, job, or college. The system that will eventually be put into place must include an accountability system that encourages students to look at an industry certification as a viable pathway as well as college. The system should encourage children to participate in band and choir and the arts and athletics, where they learn those soft skills that are so very, very necessary in the workplace. The current system has unintended consequences that have resulted in more students being placed in academic classes versus CTE, and in the remediation requirements for students who do not pass certain classes or the tests. And these require them to retake the courses, which reduce their availability to take CTE courses, as well as to take all those very important other classes such as the arts and band. The diploma and graduation pathway system should put Indiana in a strong placement for economic development. An example that I've seen recently, my niece came to live with me, junior. I haven't had a junior in the home for 20 years, from California. And when we sat down, because she most likely will go back to California, what I noticed very quickly when we laid out our Indiana Core 40 diploma and the California diploma is that the California diploma has a foundation and then they have a pathway. It's stackable. And so we were very careful to make sure that she takes those that will align with those stackability. But it was very interesting because if she were to stay in Indiana, she has to complete the Core 40, which is different than what they have in California. I'd ask that you consider a single Indiana diploma that has stackable credentials or distinctions that allow for the students to have a pathway that works for them, but also allows them to change their mind without consequence. We don't want them to get stuck in a pathway and then change. I ask that you consider a system that is flexible to meet the very specific needs of the student community and the workforce needs of the area. All students need options to support their readiness for college and careers. The pathway should help connect students to an area that they are interested in and passionate about through internships and outreach programming. I ask that the pathways provide opportunities for all students to graduate with an Indiana diploma with various pathways to distinction. I thank you for your service on this very important committee, and thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts today.
Thank you.
Jeff Butts.
Am I last? It's appropriate for a man by the last name of Butts to be wrapping up our public comment. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks for the comic. I like that.
Everybody's so heavy with solemn faces this morning. This morning I received an email from PDK releasing the results of the PDK poll. I thought it appropriate to mention a couple this morning. Americans overwhelmingly want schools to do more than educate students academically. That means blending work readiness, personal skills, and academic courses. There are several others. Another key point was parents say standardized tests don't measure what's important to them, and they put such tests at the bottom of a list of indicators of school quality. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I am the superintendent of Wayne Township, currently the president of the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents, and the past president of the Indiana Urban Schools Association. I would like to say a very special thank you to Dr. Ernest for inviting our students to the panel last week, and what an important voice they were. They are the true experts right now. They're the ones who are going through the system that we have set up and are traversing this thing called high school as they prepare for whatever lies beyond them. And so thank you for bringing them to the table last week. It was greatly appreciated, and I think they provided great insight. During the first two meetings, some consistent themes, of course, have emerged, and I'm interested to see where those lead. Themes like flexibility, responsivity, fluidity, the removal of barriers. As I shared during my public comment last week, we fully support these themes and know that they can most easily be accomplished within each district, maximizing the resources that are available to them in each community. To that end, we understand the fiscal concern that Representative Brown raised in his concluding remarks at the end of last session. We believe that by moving to a single Indiana high school diploma with pathway categories, with distinctions, with stackable credentials, whatever we want to call those, with options, we believe that districts would have the flexibility within those categories and options to use those resources and partnerships that are available to them. We also believe that costs could be shared through those partnerships with the partners and the school districts and utilizing the resources that are available in those menus of options. In doing so, we would honor many of the valuable, or the value statements rather, that were provided both at the end of the first panel discussion and at the end of the second. Another important point, I think, finally, the National Conference of State Legislators report was mentioned, No Time to Lose, at last week's meeting, and I'd like to personally thank Representative Boehning for bringing it to our attention last spring and for his work on this bipartisan report. In conversations with my colleagues, there's actually great excitement about the implementation of these recommendations found in the report. However, we know that like any successful program, implementing it in totality is the one way to prove true success with that, and not by cherry picking individual pieces out of that. We do put a great deal of merit in that report and in the recommendations contained within it as we look to build a world-class education system state by state. Finally, I would mention, and Representative Boehning can understand the political ramifications locally for us as a proud Ben Davis High School alumnus. We changed last night to move to a distinguished graduate program, which will look at representing our students and recognizing our students for more than just their GPA during the end of their high school career. That's a seismic shift in our community, but one we believe reflects the current system that we have and also the discussions that are happening on this panel. I appreciate the opportunity and thank you for your work.
Thank you very much. Jeff, thanks for bringing up the rear on the...
Always my pleasure.
On those. This is why you don't like me to go off. Yes, exactly. So with that, we appreciate those public comments, and I appreciate the fact that those were very forward-thinking and very much looking at the innovativeness, ideation that we're in right now with that, and the timeliness of having those at 3 minutes. So I really appreciate that fact. I would also just like to real quick, because I did not do this before, you have the bios that we've been giving at each meeting of those that have been involved, but I did want to just go around the table because there are those that like that, just to know where each of us are and where we come from. So again, all we need to do is just say our name and who we're representing, what we're representing, and do that, go around the table real quick. Faye, I'm just going to start with you.
Sure, I'm Faye Snockers, Executive Director of Kappa Delta Phi.
Nicole Dietrich, High School Representative for the Indiana School Counselor Association.
Senator Dennis Cruz, District 14 in Northeast Indiana.
Carlotta Cooprider, Executive Director, Teach Plus.
David Freitas, member of the State Board of Education.
Teresa Meredith, kindergarten teacher from Shelbyville and president of ISTA.
Beth Megashar with the Department of Workforce Development.
Justin Oakley, I'm with AFT Indiana, also host a show called Just Let Me Teach.
John Elsesser, Executive Director of the Indiana Non-Public Education Association.
Vanessa Johnson, teacher, Perry Central Junior Senior High School.
Lee Strassel, math guy, Madison Consolidated, Jefferson County, member of Indiana Council of Teachers of Math.
I'm Angie Crabtree. I'm on this panel as a parent.
Lindsay Lackland, Director of Guidance at Homestead High School. Good morning, Carol Auslander, Vice President of Education and Workforce Development for the Indiana Chamber of Commerce.
Megan Ulrich, high school counselor at McCutcheon High School in Lafayette.
Rochelle Baker, high school counselor at Portage High School. Haley Lancaster, English teacher at Lincoln High School in Vincennes.
Jason Bierce, Indiana Commission for Education.
Alan Taylor, Director of Career and Technical Education, CT District 45.
Brandy Oliver, Associate Professor at Butler University, teaching the Graduate School Counseling Program in the Indiana School Counselor Association.
Jennifer McCormick, State Superintendent and Chair of the State Board of Education.
Tim Luzader, Executive Director of the Purdue University Center for Career Opportunities.
DJ Watts, teacher in the Evansville Vandenberg School Corporation and member of the State Board of Education.
I'm Julie Hill. I'm a school counselor at Western Boone Junior Senior High, and I'm here representing Indiana School Counselor Association.
Bob Banning, State Representative, House, Indiana House District 91.
Alicia Kilmovich, State Board Staff.
And I'm Byron, your host. Thank you very much. And I would just really quickly here before we jump into the discussion, a couple of things. One, if you need today, because of some things that are back to back with this, and I know we've got some folks that need to leave early or need to leave on time, so we will be on time today for a noon finish. So with that, if you need to take a biological break, that's pretty good for me to say it that way. A biological break, please do so as you need to, and we'll just continue on and not interrupt the discussion for that, so that we can get those out. And there's water in the corner over here behind BJ, right? If you need that as well. So feel free to get that. And then again, I would be remiss if I didn't just very quickly just do a high-level reminder of our norms for the group. And this has not been, I can't be more excited about the way the conversations have gone in these meetings. So really, we've been following this, assume positive intention, take an inquiry stance, ground statements in evidence, communicate, allow for there to be give and take, address the issues, not the personalities, and again, respect the mountain. Because this is, as those have alluded to in the comments, this is a mountainous task, and we need to both appreciate that and respect that. So with that, excited to move to the next item here, and this came out of last meeting, was that we'd like to have a discussion about the Indiana Chamber's employee survey and the DWD's work ethic certificate. So we've asked Carol and Beth to give us a once-over of that, and not and again, I want to stress, because I've stressed this from the beginning, this is not a presentation, but a discussion. And so we want that to be a discussion, and I think Jason modeled that very well last week with how we handled the piece from them as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Carol, Beth, if you want to lead that piece of the discussion.
Sure. Do you want me to go ahead and start? Okay. I think it's under the third tab for those of you that have binders. We have results from our 10th annual consecutive employer survey that the Indiana Chamber Foundation has done. We did this, the questions went out and were collected earlier this year, about January or February this year. Typically in previous years, we've been around the 500, 600 employer responses. This year we were over 1,100, so we've actually doubled more of our response rate this year. But we've asked some of the same questions year after year after year, which has created a great trend so that we can see some results and how they've trended over the past 10 years. And just to go over some highlights of two of the trends that we found were that jobs are being left unfilled due to underqualified candidates. That number was 47% this year. That number has been growing over the past few years, 39%, 43%, 45%, and then up to 47%. The second continuing trend is that employers are finding that filling their workforce is their biggest or their next biggest challenge. If you combine those two responses over the past 4 years, it's 79%. So we are facing a severe skilled shortage in our workforce. The good news, if there's good news, is that with the economic upswing, employers are wanting to grow the size of their workforce over the next 12 to 24 months, 53%, but 59% say that the supply of qualified applicants does not meet the demand. For those skills that and requirements, 2/3 required less than a bachelor's degree, we're looking more at the middle skilled jobs, but are requiring more than a high school diploma. Some of this stuff I don't think is necessarily as relevant here in regards to drug testing and for employers and employees. So again, Dr. Ernest, you called this the employee survey. I just want to correct, this is an employer survey. This went to CEOs and HR executives, to employers all over the state in different capacities. There's usually a higher number of manufacturers, which best represents kind of the employers in the state, but we were looking at big businesses and small companies as well. So those were the two biggest trends. I'm happy to dig in deeper as to what some of these things are. Quality of place was a big issue as well, tuition reimbursement. Last year's survey, we did a lot of questions regarding work-based learning and internships. And so if you go onto our website, indianachamber.com, we have previous year's surveys and results that we're happy to provide to anybody, and I'm happy to answer any questions more in depth. So Dr. Ernest asked me to speak in regards to, we had some questions in regards to employers saying we just need them to have a general diploma. I think we heard that from some of our speakers earlier on today, and we'll train them ourselves. And I think that's somewhat correct. I think that employers, they're forced to do that right now because they have so many jobs to fill. So they are willing to take employees and then skilling them up internally. However, employers generally would prefer that they come with skills already embedded or already have some certifications before they're hired, so that they don't have to incur that cost and the time instead, because they will be ready to go as soon as they walk in the door. So happy to answer any questions or go more into depth into this.
So Carol, that was one of the questions that, just to break the ice on the questions, the 72% that businesses doing their own training internally. What's that? Can you talk about examples of that? What's that look like? How does that? What are the implications for the work we're doing here? And again, you just touched on that, but I think that's a big deal, and it's really hit home, I think, in the first two meetings that we've listened to. Can you elaborate on that, maybe just a little more?
Sure. So 72% are doing the training in-house because they're not able to find the skilled applicants that they are so desperate for. So they're willing to take those that are not as skilled and be able to skill them up, which is obviously comes at cost and time to the employer because they can't get them on the line and get them on the job right away. Employers are willing to do that. However, it would be much more beneficial and cost savings and time savings to them if we had employees ready to go. So they are forced to do that because they have such a difficult time trying to fill those jobs as needed. I mean, they're not only that, I mean, they're also, a lot of employers are not drug testing because they're that desperate for workers. So there's a lot of desperation for skilled employees at this point.
David. Carol, thanks for your report, and thanks to the Chamber for doing this on a continuous basis. It's really been helpful to look at the trend. The first finding really brought some questions to mind, that 47% of jobs are left unfilled because of unqualified or underqualified applicants. There's various ways to be underqualified or unqualified. Some might pertain to the particular business that you're talking about. There's some skills that are unique to that business that, of course, none of our graduates would be qualified in that particular area. But I'd like to drill down a little. Do they report some basic skills that we can address as a panel, like not being able to read, or why are they underqualified in relation to skills that we're responsible for as the State Board of Education.
Sure. If you give me a second to find one of my slides here. Sorry. In the biggest challenge with filling those unfilled positions, some of the, here, let me just find this here. Some of those skills have been soft skills. Some of those have been more specific for the job. But for some of the more high demand, high wage jobs that they're finding work ethic, again, soft skills. I don't know that we have, because we had so many responses that we did not break it down into what specific skills they were looking for, but over the trend has always been a strong emphasis on some of those soft skills.
And that dovetails what we discovered at our last meeting in particular. Right. I think it's really important to drill down on why candidates are not fulfilling the expectations from not the business perspective of having certain skills for that business, but in general. I would suggest maybe if we can have a focus group or something to hear from business leaders who would give us some of that information. I'd like to know, is it mostly those soft skills, or is it mostly some basic education skills that all our students should have? I think that's really critical to find out for this panel.
Well, I'm happy to take that feedback back to the foundation for inclusion in our survey for 2018. I think that'd be really good.
Question. With some of the workforce stuff, is there any help from the employers to working with the high school? Because one of the things that we found, our internships are awesome. We're out actively seeking them out. At Homestead, we're running 84 internships. But what we run up against is a lot of employers saying, well, colleges are also, they want interns too, and college students have transportation. They don't have as many rules because they're 18. They don't have to be in school, 7:30 to 2:35. So a lot of what we run into is the exposure to the type of jobs that they're talking about, because the students don't see that along the way, but also the employer's willingness to give us that opportunity to get them out there, and flexibility in the classroom to teach those soft skills, because so much time is dedicated to testing. So it's kind of twofold. If we can give the instructors times back, we can get the employers to help dispose our students to what it is. What's it like to work in our office? What's it like to be a scrap metaler? I love that part.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you asked that question. I feel like I'm almost becoming an infomercial for Indiana Internet. But another arm of the chamber is I call it, the best way to describe it is kind of a dating matching service between employers and students. And it's in the college, and we're putting an increased emphasis on high schoolers to match up through the internet employers that are interested, as well as students, based on the skills and interests that they may have. But in addition to that, I travel all throughout the state meeting with employers, and that's my first question that I ask them. Are you in the high schools? Are you in the high schools? What are you doing? It's more than just opening up your plant for tours. How are you in the career fairs? Are you meeting with the school counselors? How are we connecting? I think we had this superintendent or principal from Batesville High School. They do an incredible job working with the employers in their community. We also are going to hear about the work ethic certificate, which has a very vital, important employer component to it, because they help develop the standards, and I don't want to take away from what Beth is going to say, but the standards for what the employers need specifically in that community. The perfect example is at one point in time they had the baseline attendance requirement for the work ethic certificate was something like 92%, and the employer said, time out. We're never going to hire somebody that's only going to show up 92% of the time. So they had to increase that. So there was a lot of employer engagement and feedback. So yes, and we are happy to help high schools make that connection. that's job security for me. That's what I do, is try to put the employers and the school districts together and have those conversations on trying to get exposure for the students. But in addition, it's a great opportunity for the employers. And if they can have more internships and work-based learning experiences, then they're growing their own workforce for these companies. So these students are ready to go day one once their internship is over for a great job. And so I'm happy to have conversations offline about that too, on how we can try to make that partnership stronger.
Thank you. Carol, Senator Cruz and I last fall had an opportunity, I think it was, to hear from Region 3 Economic Development Council, which I thought was very insightful. And they shared with us their employment needs and basic projections, and they had 10,000 openings I think at the time we heard from them, and most of those were at high wage, high demand jobs. And they spoke to us a little bit about, and I know we're going to talk to counselors today, they actually talked a little bit more about doing a better job of bringing teachers into businesses. They talked, because we talked about counselors and the impact they have. They said, but the reality is the teachers are they're with the teachers a lot more than they're with counselors. And they said that their biggest disconnect was that a lot of teachers don't know what advanced manufacturing looks like. They think of factories as being these dirty old places. Are you working, I actually have another comment too, but are you working with businesses and schools to try to bring those, we have internship opportunities for teachers in some of our businesses. Are you aware of that, or is there something we could do to probably incentivize that a little bit?
We haven't. I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think there's a prime opportunity. I know that there's teachers have a lot placed on them during the so many hours that they are there during the day, but I know that a lot of employers would welcome the opportunity. They are so desperate for workers, and these employers have great stories to tell, and they're not like the dirty factories that they are. I mean, some of the manufacturing facilities that I go to are just complete robots the entire time, and it's something that I think that everybody should be exposed to. It's been an eye-opening experience for me myself personally. So I have not heard of that, but I would welcome the opportunity to try to work with schools to make that happen.
And then even a bigger problem, I think, and Andy, I was with Andy down in Batesville the 15th of August, and the comment I think is very true. I've heard it from some of my employers, is that parents, somehow we've got to connect the dots between teachers, parents, so that they understand that some of these jobs that you have openings for are not the jobs that pass, because parents are the ones that are making a lot more of those decisions than even any educator or counselor does. So the other question I have for you, and I don't know if you can speak to this, I just yesterday got a copy of the Chicago Tribune editorial. I don't know I'm sure you've probably seen it. What's so great about the Hoosier State? It's not Illinois. And they were talking about, and I would think this exasperates the problem we have, but that apparently Toyota Mazda is looking at locating another factory in the Midwest, and Indiana is great on their high on their target. The problem is, it's a blessing for us, but almost a curse, is that our unemployment rate's 3.1%, and so they're going to struggle to get, and that's one of the decisions they're looking at, they're going to struggle to get employees. Do you have any? I assume that part of what we're trying to deal with is getting them more staff ready to work. Do you have anything to share on that? Or?
Yeah, I get asked that question all the time, because we keep seeing press releases and statements that we're getting all these new companies moving here to Indiana. They obviously think that we can fill that workforce, and we are making it work somehow. In some areas of the state, like in Elkhart, I think their unemployment rate is below 2%, which is fantastic compared to where they were back in 2008, 2009. But they're looking at trying to fill 8,000, 10,000 jobs as well. So it's our survey is proving that point. But yeah, I mean, this is an issue. This is a critical issue for our site selectors and our state government that are trying to bring great high demand, high wage jobs. It's something that we need to look at. Going back to the statement that you said about bringing the parents, we had that discussion at our last meeting. And I will put in some sort of plug since I have you as well as the chairman of Ways and Means, I believe, still behind me. If I were king for a day, as Dr. Ernest likes to say, I would love to have some sort of marketing component on trying to get teachers, parents, employers all together in a room and give tours and expose everybody to what's actually out there. I don't know what that looks like per se, but some marketing needs to be done. And there needs to be the teachers, employers, school counselors, parents, they're all part of that equation. They're all critical.
I was just going to go back to the question about what employers are going to need. There's a group in Indiana that's called the Energy Systems Network that consists of Tom Easterday from Subaru, the CEO of Cummins, Mitch Daniels, so most of the leaders of our key companies, and they're very concerned with systems thinking. So they've been in contact with us saying, how do we develop system thinking in our students? It's so critical for them to understand the interconnectedness that leads across the curriculum thinking, and I'm sure we'll get to those topics later on as we look at other factors, excuse me, like critical thinking, innovation, and creativity that they're desperate for. How do we begin to work with that in terms of the school? So I know in particular, they're really focused on how do schools help prepare students with systems thinking and what goes along with that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. The chamber has kind of spun off into a new arm on the IT tech field because that's such a growing employee base here in Indiana, especially in central Indiana. And that's exactly what we're hearing from many of these companies, that students are missing some of those critical thinking skills. And so, you know, we hear a lot of rhetoric, of comments in regards to algebra, to potentially not being a requirement. The employers that I represent, for the most part, feel that that's where you learn a lot of your critical thinking skills are through some of those math courses. And so that's why the chamber has pushed it to keep those math requirements in and taking math for 4 years for a high school diploma. But critical thinking skills are really what we're hearing in addition to soft skills. Thank you for bringing that up.
Well, and I might just add in terms of, you know, there's lots of exemplars where community-based learning brings in the parents, people from the community businesses to help solve problems. There's one included in the literature, but it does become very cross-curricular. So how do you help, you know, 6th grade students solve a problem in their community where they have to use a lot of different skills and not just math? So I think there's lots of innovative ways to do that. So I'm glad to see you.
John.
Carol, just a question. As I was reading the report, you know, we've heard a lot through our prior meetings about that students can learn or earn good earnings without being college bound. Mm-hmm. But in the report, it talks about 45% of the reason applicants are not willing to take a position is because the pay is not sufficient. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that you found the tricky part of my survey, so you win the prize today, John. I want to state that this survey was filled out by employers. So this is the employer's perspective on why the potential employees did not take the job. So their question, you know, a significant answer of theirs was that they felt that the wages were not high enough. There seems to be some sort of disconnect between the potential employees' thoughts on self-worth and what was willing to be paid. There are a couple different answers that we can give. We don't really know the answer because we did not survey the potential employees. We did not survey any employees, but especially not the potential ones that didn't take the jobs. That would be too hard to capture. I think that is a very interesting statistic. Is this because the millennial generation, and there seems to be some sort of disconnect of self-worth? Is it because it's what I consider to be called an employee's market instead of an employer's market, because we have such low unemployment levels that the employee has more opportunities that they can ask for more competitive wages? Or is it the uncomfortable conversation that employers are going to have to start having that maybe our wages just aren't competitive enough? So we don't really know the answer. I think it may fall into one of those buckets or maybe a couple of those buckets. But we don't really know the answer because we didn't, and we're looking at in the future trying to figure out if we can capture some of that. I give more credence to some of the other responses, which I need to find in here, that maybe that there may be other reasons as to why they didn't take the job, but we don't know the answer to that question. We found that the survey has provided more questions sometimes than answers.
I don't know if the one business I know anecdotally that is a software business developer, and he has shared with me that he gets a lot of college graduates and developing software who come in thinking they should get 6 figures right out the door, and he said it's just not realistic. So he's actually created an apprenticeship program that he's using to develop talent internally, because he said the expectations are not, of some of our students, are not realistic to what the market actually would be able to compensate.
And I think the addition of, we're doing a pilot program for Indiana Career Explorer through some of our high schools, which is a career development software program, and I think what we'll hopefully see is they will see potential salaries, and maybe once we educate students more, maybe that will help. I don't know, but again, I don't know if that's a millennial generation. I'm not a millennial, but I think there's potential for that. I also think it has to do with the job market. Just like I said, you know, when there's instead of a buyer's market or a seller's market, it's an employer's employees, but these employees have access to lots of jobs in lots of different areas around their state. You know, I think a big one, especially for that generation, is they pick where they want to live, and then they choose what they want to do. And so that's something that once they figure out where they want to live, then they have lots of opportunities for jobs, and they can compete for those jobs. So.
I recently had a chance to go to an opening day of a school corporation where the administration had brought in a panel of business leaders, which I thought was fabulous, because, and then there was a Q&A opportunity, and it gave teachers and other educational employees a chance to ask questions about what's really happening. But the one big takeaway I heard consistently from every business leader that was on that panel was that their challenge right now is finding employees who have a work ethic, who will show up, and who have an attitude of collaboration, because it's not Snapchat and video games. It's real live. It's not a simulation, folks. It's the real
having a
deal.
conversation.
And actually being able to have a conversation with someone about something you need, or a conversation with someone about a skill area that you need help in. Because they all said time and time again, and perhaps for the reasons you mentioned, that they're willing to train on the skill part. The skills are changing, and I would say from a teacher perspective, we get that the skills are changing faster than we can educate ourselves and prep students. So what I want my students to leave with are the critical thinking skills, the right work attitude, and the work ethic. And so I just found it interesting that that was what this panel shared after all their presentation about the kinds of work that they do and what they're looking for in employees. At the end of the day, it really comes back to, I guess, what you would call soft skills in a sense, the attendance, the attitude, and the work ethic.
Teresa, that's a perfect segue to the next part here with talking about the work ethic certificate. Beth, you can
I'll slip you the $5
bill
later. So, yeah, I am not actually over this at the Department of Workforce Development, so I will do my best to eloquently describe it. But basically, out of the State Workforce Innovation Council came the idea that education and the employers and economic development and career centers needed to work together to create what we're calling the Governor's Work Ethic Certificate, to sort of reward and inspire what I call one of those intelligences that's not really measured in academics necessarily. I like to think of the work ethic certificate as the great equalizer because it is for everyone and it doesn't matter really whether your GPA, well, it does require a 2.0, but it's something that your 4.7s and your 1.7 or 8s can aspire to, because it's about those soft skills that seem to be highly valued and that we keep hearing about again and again from employers. So a couple of years ago, the Department of Workforce Development put out a competitive grant, and I think there were 18 pilot schools. And this is in your packet as well. It's behind the chamber information. To school corporations who wanted to do exactly that, and that is to partner with industry and economic development to talk about what are competencies that we all value, I guess. And I think it's interesting because this relates to what you shared about if you look at this handout, you can see one of them is students' attendance rate is 98%. That's pretty freaking high, you know? So I think that's great. And we hear that all the time with our kids who are in internships as well. They have to show up. You know, we can't get the work done if you don't show up. So that's higher than most schools' attendance rate. So I think one thing to celebrate with the work ethic certificate is that it's not something that's easy to attain. And if you can look at this, basically a kid stays out of trouble. I love the fact that it puts an emphasis on public service as well, because we are all looking for that, right? That kind of a recognition on the part of students that the world is bigger than themselves and their iPhone. So you can take a look at these competencies, but essentially 18 schools are in the pilot. I think more school districts have come on board since then. I will share with you, I think one school district that gets a lot of recognition for this is Greater Clark County, because they put a lot of work on making this something. I talked about this at our last meeting, that what's critical about this is that it's critical that there's buy-in from all parties. Otherwise, it's a piece of paper. But in Greater Clark, many of the industries have done a commitment to interview a student, a guaranteed interview, if they earn this certificate. Because it's not like if you have a district of 1,000 kids that 700 kids are going to earn this, because it's that challenging. Other industries in the Greater Clark area have, for example, if they hire someone, there's a bonus if you have that work ethic certificate. Some companies put a student on maybe a faster track to earn higher wages with a certificate. So I think those that have really bought into it have seen some real benefits from the work ethics certificate. So, and I did want to just kind of reply to Representative Baining over there. You were asking about training teachers or getting teachers exposed. I know the DOE has a program where they send teachers on externships in pathways. It's kind of small at this point, but I think that is something that definitely would be great to see that program grow. And I think since this morning has been a focus on kind of creativity, I wanted to share in my former district in Noblesville, we had done a lot of work with getting kids out in meaningful internships. And at some point, as an admin team, we had an aha moment that we'd left teachers behind. And so one of our days, instead of doing your traditional PD, we had an industry tour for teachers. So we encouraged them. We had, I think, about 16 different opportunities for the teachers in pathways. So we had manufacturing, we had construction, we had liberal arts. A lot of our history teachers went to City Hall to learn more about how the government process works. And I got to tell you, it was one of the most exciting days as an administrator because teachers were like kids in a candy store. That was such a meaningful day for them to learn more about what's in their community and the employers in their community. So I just wanted to throw that out as just a tip of the hat to, we keep hearing flexibility, but that was something very flexible that is just a local decision that we made at Noblesville.
Just to add to that, thank you, Beth. And I use Beth's former high school as my best example when it comes to work-based learning and internship opportunities. And you're right, when I give my best example for work ethics certificates, it's always Greater Clark County Schools. They were kind of the grandfather, if you will, of the best practices of how this has worked, and they were the original pilot before the 18 pilot programs that and I sit on the work ethics certificate task force of the State Workforce Innovation Council under DWD. That's a mouthful.
That is a lot.
And so what we did is we took some of the best practices from the programs that were already working well. And I can't remember, I feel like there was one maybe out in Fort Wayne, but I know that Clark County, and we developed a template for other schools to use to help replicate the program. DWD put together some grant dollars, which is where we got the 18 school districts. There are more that are applying, I think, for a second round, I believe. And what I think is one of the most critical parts is the employer buy-in, just like Beth said, that they have to put their money where their mouths are. We want employers to be able to say, this is what's important to us for our future employees and our future workforce. But then they have to give too and say, okay, well, they get an automatic interview. If they graduate with this at our company, we're gonna offer bonuses and incentives. If we hire them with this, we'll pay them a little bump. And it's working really well, and we're hearing from employers that it's working. And then I believe there's the hope that we can expand it from high school down to 8th grade and then down into 4th grade, so that they're starting with these skills, because learning them at 10th or 11th grade is sometimes almost too late. And so what we want to do is get a better baseline for this earlier on. So I think both of us are willing to answer some questions in regards to what this certificate looks for. There's been potential legislation every year that we would do this and we would give money. There was bills that were offered to give money to students for doing this. We haven't been supportive of that. The students aren't going to do this for $200. They're going to do this because they can get a good job afterwards. If anything, I would rather provide funding for schools to be able to implement this program in a comprehensive way.
The work ethic certificate's designed for career-bound students. And as I read some of these, for example, the third bullet, students will demonstrate ability to be a self-starter and critical thinker. The next one, students will demonstrate reliability, responsibility, and teamwork. And as I read these, I'm thinking, shouldn't every student in Indiana graduate and demonstrate in some way that they can do this?
Absolutely.
And so my question is, from a state public policy perspective, shouldn't we consider these and others for all students in Indiana? And if we're talking about pathways, we could have these soft skills, or as I call it, essential professional skills, into a requirement. And in order to be successful in college or in life, you have to have these skills. So would it be okay to broaden it? Does that make sense, from career-bound students to all students in Indiana? And I'd like to get your reaction to that.
Speaking on behalf of employers, which is why I think I'm on this committee, I think we want all employees to have these skills. These are career skills that we need. They're life skills. I mean, it's more than just career. It's life. We need to show up. Showing up is half the battle, right? Being able to think critically, being able to have a conversation, being able to shake a hand, being able to communicate and have conflict, dispute resolution, being able to work on that. Those are life skills. I don't want to speak for the Department of Education, but I believe that we can integrate some of this into some of our existing standards and teaching into classrooms. I don't know that we need a work ethic course per se, But I think the work ethic certificate is a way to incentivize students, whether they're going into career or into college. The idea behind the work ethic certificate is for those, the original idea was for those that were not college bound, because that's where we are seeing less of those soft skills are in that population of students, but and that's where we wanted to focus on first. But again, this has been a rolling process for 5 years or so, so I think it's important eventually that all students have this, but I think it's very important that we start building it down into the more primary levels of education as well.
And Carol, I'd like to provide a little insight on that also. Greater Clark is in our CTE district, and so from the beginning, these standards, most of these standards were in what we have within our district, again, what we refer to as CTE District 45. And they were developed and vetted through about 100 different business partners through many, many meetings. And really, again, in our region, this was designed for all students, just not CTE students. And so it started with Greater Clark, and then our Career Center was a part of that also, so we became involved in it. It is now in 7 or 8 of our schools in our local area. But there's 2 things that are really key here, and you've mentioned one. One is that it expands to a K-12 program. It's not a seniors only certificate. You will not change behaviors and characteristics and value systems in 1 year. That's a K-12 conversation. So what's been developed is that there's a certificate awarded at the culmination of the elementary experience, and the middle school experience, and then the senior experience. And so the conversations going through the school corporation, it parallels at every grade level. So they're talking about these same characteristics and trying to integrate this criteria and these standards and conversations with every kid at every grade level. The second thing that's very important, which Beth mentioned, is if there's not a true business support and understanding, it really is just an internal attendance certificate from the school. And it really doesn't take funding to implement this. The funding would really be potentially to have staff help build the business partnerships. That's the challenge. And there's a whole list of examples that have already been cited, and I'll cite another one that's sort of our gold standard. We have a local employer who actually, any student in our 6-county area that they end up employing that carries the work ethic certificate, that student has opportunity, that new employee has the opportunity to earn a bonus of $3,500 over, now it's 3 years, so there's like a signing bonus. If they maintain those characteristics within the work ethic certificate, then there's increments every 6 months or so that totals $3,500 that no other employee in their organization has opportunity to earn. So if we have more businesses valuing that certificate at that level, it will become very, very meaningful. And so I think those are 2 things to keep in mind, is maybe really 3 things, is it really is for all students. And secondly, it really needs to be a K-12 to be effective. And thirdly, you have to have that strong, strong business community partnership, not only within that local school corporation, but within your region. And there has to be the same criteria. So if a student comes from your high school or your high school or your county, it's parallel, or else we will confuse all of your business partners if we're doing things a little differently. We have to be very consistent in what we do.
One interesting statistic that I forgot to mention that I think is amazing, and I believe this came from Dr. Mellon at Greater Clark County Schools, was that their discipline referrals went down 200% once they implemented this program. So not only is it helping the students achieve some of their soft skills, but they're able to achieve more academically because they're in class, they're able to learn, they're focused, which I just think is tremendous. So I want to make sure I get that statistic correct, but I know that their discipline deferrals have gone down tremendously.
So, Carol, you made yourself king a minute ago. I thought about making Beth queen here a minute. Now I got to look to Alan and make him king. We're just going to be a bunch of emperors here before it's over with. But Alan, you said something, and I just want to ask this just from a reaction standpoint. We've talked a lot about stackable. That came up a lot in the public comment this morning. Would it be your opinion, so I'm going to ask you your opinion now, because I'd like for this to be a discussion. Would that be, and so we've also talked about this portability piece, regionalization, that came up in the last one too. So in order to look at portability, would the work ethic certificate be the first foundational piece of the stack, for lack of any better way to put that, that if we were going to look at, and Jason, I'd ask you to jump in on this too, because we've talked about what's it look like if different regions have different employers, that certificates and things need to look differently. Would this be the first piece of a foundation if you were looking from a stackable standpoint of things that students have, that they would have, that if we were looking at, hey, we're going to approve this route because this is a regional need, but it's going to have that piece. Am I making sense with that question at all? Is that, do you all see, because that's what I'm hearing in this discussion, and I just think it's interesting to point out, this is a foundation.
I think that, Byron, that has merit and that there's possibilities. If you look within the criteria, it's a 2.0 stand or 2.0 GPA, because it's not about your academic attainment. Really, it's truly about your work ethic. And so it could be a foundational requirement because you have attendance. And what do we, any industry sector, it doesn't matter, pick a sector, they're going to say the same thing. It just needs people to show up, be on time. Well, there's the criteria. So that could be something, again, that elevates that within the mind of our students and within our families. So, yes, I think it's a possibility.
I want to comment on this as well. Just, I'm looking at this and I'm wondering, you know, in higher ed, you would want to see all of these elements as well. So wouldn't it be awesome if everyone in Indiana, including higher ed, could put some emphasis on the value of like a work ethic certificate? This is the kind of kid you want going to college as well. It's not just about career or workforce. This is everybody wants a hard worker who shows up and has a good work ethic.
If I may be so bold. So it's really easy for me to tell Joey, have a hard work ethic, have a good work ethic, have integrity, you need to show up. Those are skills, my responsibility, my work ethic. They were learned behaviors. So I think it is going to require some funding. It's a serious issue. This is a tremendous document. But for me, just to tell Joey, have a good work ethic, that's unreasonable. If we could have the young man who's spending hours, and I'm a math guy, but the young man spending hours trying to pass that algebra test, if we could put him in a class, because I will tell you, most of these kids, they have not learned these behaviors, they have not seen these behaviors, and teachers are so inundated with teaching their core subjects and their standards that because my job, and I was in the world of work for 20 years and I'm teaching math. I'm not teaching math, I'm teaching students, and I'm sure we've all heard that, but you know, please give us time to teach those students these important skills, these soft skills, to be humans, to be contributing members of our society. So I think it takes some special time, special classes. If you look at Avid does that, JAG program does that, but those are all programs mostly intended to get a kid to college. But and if a kid has soft skills, they're going to be able, if they have those soft skills to be responsible, they're going to have the skills and they're to realize what is important. Or maybe it is important that I get this certification. Maybe it is important, or the value in a day's work. I don't think,
And individual courses would be very beneficial, absolutely. But another key component is that we have professional development within the organization. That those conversations are happening within all adults working with that child. So.
I just wanted to piggyback on that. I kind of touched on it before. The ability to give teachers back time. In our system right now, we spend so much time testing, and if you fail a test, then we hook you for more testing. You do the AccuPlace or diagnostic. If you actually look at a calendar of when they're testing and when they're not, the instructional time that we have taken away from teachers is astronomical. To allow them the ability to do that, as well as the students, allow them the abilities to explore. We are a transition. High school is a transition period. So we need support from the middle schools and we need support from the other time to get them excited about things so they do get engaged. And that's through taking different courses that now are taken up from remediation. And a lot of those kids have to repeat courses. So all of a sudden, out of a 7-period day, 3 of them become math or remediation to math. And they're missing out on the culinary arts class that might get them engaged, that makes them actually want to come to school 98% of the time. So in looking at this, I really think we need pathways that look at the flexibility to get students re-engaged and not just keep testing them.
So as soon as she said we need to give teachers time back, I am a high school English teacher, and in 12 years I have lost more and more time. And I've lost literal time to testing and test prep, and I have lost the creative freedom to teach soft skills. So when talking to Alicia about the students' comments, and I said, let me guess, they all said, no one ever taught me how to do a resume or cover letter, and she said, exactly. I used to do that unit. It took about 2 weeks to teach kids how to meaningfully write a cover letter and a resume. It takes 11 days to do diagnostic reading level testing, to do benchmark testing, and then to get through the I-step. That's 11 days lost that I could be teaching that soft skill. And in that class that I taught it was in a public speaking class, which we used to require as a graduation requirement at Lincoln High School, semester of speech. Everybody needs to be a public speaker no matter what your job is. But we had to dissolve it into a general English 11 course in order to get kids on a better track into graduation. So I no longer have that dedicated class. The ECA has sucked the air out of the room. Teachers want to be able to do this stuff, but we can't because of that ECA requirement.
I would say it's even more basic than that, it goes all the way down to kindergarten. I finally taught long enough to where how I used to teach changed, and then that's what we're talking about going back to. And so, I mean, I remember the days when we sat in kindergarten in small groups and taught social interaction skills and taught coping skills. What do you do if you want that and you can't have that right now? What do you do? How do you manage yourself, and how do you get the right, how do you earn the opportunity to get whatever it is you want? Those were skills we actually taught. Those disappeared when we brought in 5-year-olds and pushed standards so far down, and we were teaching first grade, some beginning second grade standards now, to 5-year-olds, some of the youngest kids, and we aren't teaching them anymore in order to prepare for tests. When I left kindergarten 10 years ago, our most recent testing audit at that time was 1/3 of our time was spent assessing children, 1/3 of our time in order to prepare them for whatever test was coming next. So we abandoned one thing for another, and at some point we've got to have a conversation about how to balance all of that, because those skills we used to teach did build so that when kids got into middle school and you were teaching some of those career pathways or the opportunities to public speak, or you were beginning to build resumes, they had the transitional or the foundational skills to make the transition or the leap to something that was going to be real and practical for their future. So the time is really the piece that I think you've all hit on, that it just isn't there anymore, and we need to figure out how to change that.
I want to say something that's constructive and not combative, so I'm going to start off with that. Before I leave here today, I would like for everybody to at least, in their busyness of their lives, check out a book called Whiplash. It does a great job of bashing every entity about what's going to happen. It says there's going to be 50 million jobs gone, the Elon Musk stuff. It bashes unions. Some people get excited about that. It also talks about, you keep hearing this word disconnect at this table. It also talks a lot about that. So it's a very good book. Most people here would love it because you're here because you're interested in this. I also think that it'd be very important if everyone in our legislature got into our schools. And I don't mean just showing up for a speech. I say this in a genuinely passionate, heartfelt way. First and foremost, I'm a father of a little 7-year-old wild little girl. And she comes home every night in second grade, and she's 7. And you know what she does? You know what she does? Math and reading, math and reading, math and reading. And that's it. There's no social studies, there's no science, she's in a fine arts academy, that's what we call it there. It's wonderful because they do have dance, but I think it should be mandatory, a mandatory nudge, is that an oxymoron? To get people who are on education committees and policymakers and chamber folks to come into our schools and spend a week, teach a week, walk a mile. You will be blown away. I've been saying this for 17 years. I've seen 2. And I don't mean just walk in and get to teach like the GT gifted poetry class. I mean have a lunch duty. I mean go out for recess, the ones that have that still. Go teach 8th grade social studies. There's a special place for heaven for you in there. But I just think those are things that we should think about. Those are easy things that don't cost money. We have we can do that. I think I think this is very important. But to get to the heart of it, teachers just want to be able to teach, and we keep it's the old Peanuts comic strip. Lucy moving to football. That's all we're doing. But I think this is very important, and I'm on board. When you sent me an invite, I was excited. But those are my comments. I don't mean to offend or obstruct. I'm just saying, hey, if you talk about a disconnect when a 60-year-old lady at the bank told me when I used to teach, these kids can't even sign their checks. Those kids aren't going to be writing checks. So there's a disconnect on both sides of the table, and we need to start figuring out ways that we can do this if we truly, genuinely care about some of this.
She's had her hand up for a while. I've talked a lot. Go ahead.
Carlotta, go ahead.
Good morning. I want to just, I get the privilege of working with teachers all day and every day. I wake up every day as a teacher, and as I was preparing for this panel, I reached outside of my regular network of teachers, and I talked to my kids' teachers. So I'm a parent of 3 kids. 2 of my children are grown, and they work in Silicon Valley. One works for Tesla, and one works for the gaming industry. And when I talked to my children, and I talked to their teachers, it was the conversations that Haley talked about. It was these things that we're talking about with teachers and having leadership moments with the students and having these conversations about what problems they want to solve and their passion. And that's, unfortunately, my 2 older children have left Indiana to go be in California. My last child's at DePaul to be a teacher. And somebody said it earlier, they pick where they want to live first. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's telling me what 3 states he wants to live in, and he's going to teach there. And so this conversation we're having is so critical, and we have to think about what is learning and developmentally what is learning. And we think about all of us sitting here today, we learned important things in Algebra 2. We learned important things in English 12, but we also learned how to ride a bike. And we also learned a million other skills that we need to be successful adults. So I would just want to encourage all of you that teachers want to be involved in this conversation. When I reached out to my kids, then I reached out to their teachers to prepare for this panel, and some of their teachers are retired. But it was those conversations they were having in those soft skill classes that lit that spark and that passion and created a pathway in their mind that wasn't a piece of paper, that wasn't in a binder in someone's office. It sparked it inside of them, and that's what our teachers do. So let's continue to keep our teachers at the table, keep our students at the table, and let's listen to them. Because my oldest son came home 5 years ago and said he hadn't held a pen and a paper in multiple years. I'm like, well, how do you do that? And he didn't carry any money. And I'm that person now. I don't carry any money. And we can learn a lot from kids, we can learn a lot from teachers, and we have to keep them involved in this conversation because it is changing. And learning isn't always about what's on the assessment. And I just want to keep that in front of us.
Just to kind of pick from every person's conversation that they've had so far, and then to bring it back to your original question, Dr. Ernest, in regards to whether we need to have specific courses in work ethic, or can we integrate that into existing classes? And I know that there's disconnect between how much time is being spent teaching for the assessments moving forward, but there are certain things that can be done. My husband is a 5th grade public school teacher in Indianapolis, and the first thing he does when he teaches his 10-year-old students is when you walk in the door, you shake the teacher's hand, you look them in the eye, and you say good morning. Sometimes that takes a month for these kids to get that, but that's something that is exactly the first thing you need to do when you go in for a job interview. And they're teaching that at 10 years old. And that's not taking time away from their math or their English language arts or anything like that. But there's certain things that we can integrate that I think won't take that much time. It's as the students are walking in the classroom and then when they're walking out at the end of the day. But you say, you make eye contact, you shake, you develop a strong handshake, and you have the verbal skills to say good morning. And so those are certain things that I think can be integrated that you will remember when you are 18 and going into your first job, or going, when you're 22 and you're going into your first job after college. Sorry, I'm going back to my notes. When we were talking about whether this should be just for students going into the workforce, if this is for the work ethic for career students, all students are career bound, whether they're going to college or not. So I think if we just talk about career bound, we can make the distinction between whether they're going to college afterwards or not, but all students should learn this because they're all going to be career bound at some point in time. And then going back to your original question, Dr. Ernest, and I think what you're trying to get at when you're talking about stackable is whether we can integrate work ethic as part of a pathway. And I think that it can. I don't think it should be its own pathway per se, but I think it should be the basis for all pathways. Just like you said, that's kind of the foundation, and then we have the walls and roof and all of that going up. But I think it should be as part of a pathway. Whether it's required for all students or not, I don't know the answer to that. But stackable, yes, but it just can't be standalone.
Yeah, just building on what Carol said, sometimes in these conversations it seems like there's a tendency towards overcorrection. And do we want students with soft skills? Do we want students with life skills? Do we want them with professional skills? Yes, all of the above. But I would argue that we not convince ourselves to make a false choice between that and a strong academic foundation. Not only can we do both, we don't have the choice but to do both. And so I just think we need to keep that in the back of our minds as we're having this conversation, because it almost feels like we might make a hard turn in an opposite but equally counterproductive direction.
Yeah, I was going to tag team that. When I say that the ECA, I think, has a relevant point to it. When it gets to, if you don't pass the ECA, then you take the AccuFocus or diagnostic, and we keep testing and remediate. At a time that a student, as an example, takes it 6 times and has determined their whole high school career based on it, we've lost that student. So there needs to be an alternate pathway, and what does that look like that the student can demonstrate it? I think the ECA does that for us. I don't know that necessarily, as somebody mentioned, increasing requirements of the diploma is the answer, because then we lose some of the exploration as well that gets it. So I just wanted to make that clear. My concern's more just the adding testing on top of testing and just that whole cycle that it gets into.
So Lynn, did you want to make a comment? Hang on, let me transition us, and then you will, okay? It's the only time I get to shut you down. But Lindsay, that's a perfect transition, because I wanted to also reflect on Haley's comments as well, because those are well taken and where we are. So for this group, and from Jason's standpoint of overcorrecting, if we look at this from a system standpoint, what would be, so I'd like for us to shift our thinking to what does it look like? What do those pathways look like? How do we get to what Lee's talked about here and that? Because that's the part that we're going to have to look at is let's not look at the obstacles now, which is it's easy to do that, right? Or that's what we do. But let's look at, do we bring back, so for example, just the simple bringing back of resume building, right? And putting that back in. I'd like for us to shift to what's it look like? And then we can figure out, are there obstacles that we need to remove? Are there things from an implementation standpoint? Does that make sense? If we shift to what's the ideal world look like? They kid me about representing Brown always makes emperors, I make kings and queens for days, but what's it look like? That's, if we could focus to, because I think that's, at least with my fellow state board members on here, that's what we want to hear, right? What's the innovative, Dave talks about this all the time. What's going to I want Illinois to keep saying, we'd like to be Indiana, right? And whoever else, I don't know if that's exactly what they were saying, but, you know, that's what we want to be. And so I'd like for us to shift, and I want us to, in the hour and 10 minutes we have left, I want to hear from our teachers and counselors, and what does this look like? Does that make sense?
Should I go? Okay. So I was pretty pumped, sorry. I was pretty pumped to hear all the public comments of people bringing up that a change in the diploma is necessary. Because when I was thinking about these graduation pathways, and I was thinking about like, okay, internships are great, okay, early college, which is what Vincennes has, is great. But the way that the current diploma tracks are, there is no freedom to do that. I'm a core 40 kid, class of 2001 Pride. I am a wildly successful, well-adjusted adult. I teach honors kids who are a special breed of high-strung little ball of energy, and who are stressing themselves out and killing themselves over academic honors diplomas and AP classes and college credit classes, that they feel threatened that if I don't get this, then Butler won't love me, then IU won't love me. And I'm not speaking for the guidance counselors here, but I have seen guidance counselors also, push kids to go beyond those graduation diplomas. You have kids who take algebra in 8th grade, congratulations, you're done with your math your junior year, go do something fun. But then, no, colleges really want you to take math your senior year. Not if you're gonna be a sports journalism major at Butler. And we had to get it in writing from a professor at Butler that no, Zach does not need pre-calc and trig to be a sports journalist, And it's just so important to recognize the electives and the freedoms that kids have. Being a core 40 kid allowed me to take all the fine arts classes and to take as many English electives as Lincoln offered, because I knew that I was going to do theater and English. Shakespeare was not a college credit, but it had value to my future education. Psych and sociology were not college credit, but they had value to my future education. And I know that this is not Indiana's fault that the general diploma no longer counts. That's the Fed's ruling, and we need to figure out how to overcome that. But my husband is class of 2000, general ed diploma. He's a sergeant with the police office. He's a sergeant with the local police department. He is a wildly successful, well-adjusted adult. And so we need to find ways to now look at the problem we have with our diplomas and these pathway options, and figure out a way to redo things, because in looking at this, preparing for this panel, all I saw was a domino effect. That if we want to do these pathways, we have to do something about our existing diplomas. I'm gonna stop now.
I'd like to add to that in the sense, if we're looking at what is the graduation pathways, if we look at the how, it's through the teachers, right? So when I heard that we have these teachers that want to do internships with employees, right? We know that we have teachers that want to expand the externship program at DOE. So we have to expand the career pathways for the teachers so this work can get done. And so when we think about who's going to do this work with the students, who's going to implement these pathways, who's going to do the day-to-day work, it really is the teachers. And so really expanding our thinking about what do career pathways look like for teachers too. And it's not the way a teacher looked like 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
I would kind of piggyback. I definitely believe it's the teachers, but school counselors, and there's a bunch of them on here, so hopefully we can get them in here.
Sorry, you guys are teachers to me too, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, yes. But one of the things is, with an ECA, if a student passes it and we move on, that's great. If we remediate and they pass, great. But at the same time, allow us the creativity to work with all the students. With the academic honors diploma, if you look at the remediation rate, we're doing 3% there. Those are the students that are getting accepted by Purdue and IU. So we're doing good things. So I don't want some of that to be lost in here. Also, we need to preserve the good things that we do have going. Dual credit is a huge for making our students college ready, and there's a lot that's working against that. But one of the things that we've realized is it's not just about the dual credit, it's about learning the time management. So we've had the flexibility to create a senior experience that allows students to take classes on a collegiate schedule at the high school Because academically, they're prepared, but they don't have the time management type skills to do those. So we need to work with Higher Learning Commission to make sure the dual credit is still offered in the high school, because it's huge. It helps students that maybe weren't college bound understand they can be successful at the college level. The success on the ECA and seeing those skills are important too, and allowing counselors to finally look at that student who might need a waiver that's not an ECA and say, you know what other pathway can we get you through? Maybe that is a credentialing. Maybe it's looking at an adult roles class to make sure, because with Jasper Engineer, they wanted somebody that would show up and had financial literacy that can manage their bills. So maybe that's a pathway that, that we need to look at to make sure those students that have that need, because a lot of times it's instilled at the home, which I would thought was brought up before, but there are students that need that education. So as a counselor, I just encourage the flexibility to allow us to look at students individually and be creative with them. Help them be excited and come to school and find different pathways for them. And with the ECA, if they pass it and they've demonstrated that also gives them a foundation, great. And if they don't, what is the pathway that it looks like that needs to be that they can be successful in their post-secondary?
Yeah, I want to jump in here too, I guess on behalf of the school counselors, and make sure that I think that we're vital to the success. And I think there's a lot of different elements, but we've talked about soft skills, we've called them soft skills, life skills. I think calling it social emotional learning and just making that truly embedded and not thinking it as an add-on or a supplement, but really that this has to be embedded K-12. And school counselors, that's like an area of expertise, and to really utilize us for the training that we have. Here in the next couple of years, school counselors are going to be required, if they're coming from an accredited program, to have 60 graduate training hours. That's substantial. So they're highly trained, highly qualified professionals in your building. So utilize them to do this level of work. Collaborators, they're educators. So I know we're talking about teachers getting bogged down with testing and remediation, but counselors are often bogged down with test coordination and schedulers. And so utilizing I think I was writing down I love the work ethics certificate. I have some issues around, thinking of some of our speakers early on about equity and flexibility. And when Rick Doss was thinking and talking about the refugee students, and I think about the students that I've interacted and still counsel with trauma, those kids need a lot of extra levels of support. And they need our school counselors, those tier 2, tier 3 students. And so that's your school counselors in your buildings. They can provide those levels of services, but often we don't have either enough or they are not doing the services that they are been trained to do. So those are just a few of the things that I've been sitting here jotting down, and just wanted to make sure that we think about how we're using our school counselors, and do we have enough school counselors in the buildings as well.
I would just echo several of the things that have already been said, but I think, in my ideal model, I think exploration is really critical, and that has to begin at the elementary level. Allowing them very real hands-on exploration opportunities that then create the relevance to find the importance of the tasks that we're asking of them. They're going to find, yes, this is what this kind of a job is going to involve, and so this is why your attendance is important, why your math is important, all of those sorts of pieces that we're putting together. I love the notion of flexibility in the diplomas, which then allows that freedom of exploration. I think we're asking a lot of even our high school students to expect 16, 17-year-old students to know exactly what it is they want to do for the rest of their lives. And the more opportunities we can create for some flexibility, they can find things that they're passionate about that maybe they hadn't experienced before, and make a better choice for their own career path. And I just would echo what Dr. Oliver was saying, that school counselors have the expertise, and there are the 3 levels. They're trained to deal with the social emotional issues, but also the college and career readiness and the academic piece. So if we can better utilize the school counseling professionals in our building and make sure that we have them in our elementary and middle level buildings, they can help tie those pieces together for students to create that relevance.
Can you, and maybe Lindsay both, because you both brought up the flexibility piece, and we've now begun to use that word so much that I don't understand what it means in the context, right? And it may just be because I'm stupid. And somebody will probably tweet, yes, he is. But could you explain what flexibility means in your, when you're saying flexibility, what is that? What's that look like? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak, for us, I have, well, we're about 2,300 and I have 7 counselors and myself. So for me, we require a meeting every year where we meet with our students to look at their plan. And flexibility comes in that when our students walk in with a 4-year plan that was created in their 8th grade year, that we don't have to be married to that. Because if we're doing what we should do in high schools, we should be exposing them to different things that get them excited. And if all of a sudden my surgeon who passes out in biomedical realizes they can't be a surgeon, I need to have the flexibility and the time to meet with that student to direct them a different way, to give them a foundation that careers they haven't even been exposed to yet, we can get them into. So when I say flexibility, I need to be able to adapt that plan to reach that student where they're at. You know, when I brought up the middle schools before, I think it would be great if employers started having career fairs in the middle schools to exploit them to more, because I'll tell you, freshman and sophomore year, I have a whole bunch of lawyers, surgeons. I don't start getting teacher social workers till junior year. And if I start bringing up some of the advanced manufacturing, it's more looked at as, oh, well, my student's not being successful, so you're going to turn it. Where if we can get them excited about these careers so they pursue those things, as they go through high school and expose them to it, that's the flexibility I'm talking about. That when a student, because as adults, we change our mind all the time, but if we can get them more educated about what they want to do in their post-secondary, so when they go to the higher learning of Ball State or Purdue, they have a passion that keeps them going, I think they're going to stay engaged. They're going to want to go to those classes, and they have an idea where a lot of that exploration is taking place when they get to a college level, and all of a sudden they take a course and they're like, whoa, this isn't for me. And some stay committed to it because they think they have to, and some change. So that's the flexibility I'm talking about, being able to throw different classes in there.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So I think there's always been an assumption anyway that the 4-year course plan that students would start middle school isn't set in stone, that it would be revisited and updated on a regular basis. So can you just give us a little more color on what flexibility you don't have to do that?
No, I'm asking to keep the flexibility. A lot of times when they talk around like a college and career path, there was suggestions to take 6 classes in this area and really try to get them. And that's what I talked about. I don't think that we answer our things by necessarily increasing requirements, because that tends to lose the flexibility. You know what? 4 years of math is absolutely appropriate for a lot of students, depending on what they're majoring in when they go to a post-secondary. It's not necessary for all students. That's the flexibility that I'm talking about. If we start requiring 4 years of math for all students, not only do we limit flexibility for them to explore stuff, but we start moving diplomas away from students that would fill these jobs that we're talking about. And the opportunities for students without diplomas, everybody at this table would recognize, are drastically reduced.
That's 2 credits. I'm just trying to understand how we go from an additional 2 credits in math to losing all flexibility to sort of help students find their pathway.
If you look at the 2 credits in isolation, I don't think it does. But when you start adding everything up, it absolutely does. I mean, if you're talking about other requirements they need, say they want Purdue or IU, they also need foreign language, so there goes 4. The personal finance, depending on your school district, some require a course, some have a test out option, there's a course there. If they're going for academic honors, which a lot of the universities, if you ask them, Purdue, 80% of their enrollees have academic honors diploma or the equivalent, there's 2 fine arts credits. So when you really start adding it up, and then if you have a student that enjoys the fine arts and they're in band every semester too, there's 8 credits gone right away. So if you look at all of them in isolation, the flexibility seems like it's still there, but when you start adding them up, their flexibility to explore classes, I am in a great position at Homestead. The electives that we ask are that we offer are cross curriculum, but I got to have the opportunity to get students into those classes.
And to piggyback on that, again, when you look at them in isolation, it's not that, but with those academic honors students, it's not only that they have to take those classes, the academic honors class requires you to get a C or better and maintain an average GPA of a 3.0. So we have academic honors students who are retaking classes their junior, senior year to improve upon a grade their freshman, sophomore year. I had to talk a kid off a ledge, an academic ledge I call it, talk a kid off an academic ledge because he was so convinced if he retook these 5 classes, he could get A's and have a 4.0. And I'm like, don't do it, do an internship. No one's gonna care. And it took like 3 weeks of convincing this kid, go do the work-based learning and shadow a dentist if you wanna be a dentist. And I had to contact 2 actual dentists I graduated with to tell him, go do the internship, don't retake those. And we do have kids that are super competitive in that. So that's part of that flexibility, that competitive nature that the diploma is putting in and the college admissions are putting in.
And Jason, I'm going to respond as a mom now. So I have 4 kids, and my oldest is a sophomore at Butler, and so she had to decide she graduated with academic honors, but she had to decide her last year, do I take math? And we came from a really small high school, about an hour north of here, or do I leave and go intern and shadow with a county judge because she's interested in law? And I encouraged, as the school counselor had, go be with a judge. And that was because it was only offered one time a day, because she needed to either take morning classes and be able to leave in the afternoon, or be able to, if she wanted to take that last year of math, she couldn't leave in that afternoon because we have only one teacher. Does that make sense? So sometimes your smaller schools only offer 1 period a day, certain classes. So that was a factor in some rural, smaller schools that limit some kids' ability. So,
Megan, and then we'll come back to here.
I definitely agree about keeping the flexibility. That's going to be so important. But I also think having flexibility in how we define success for our students. We're talking a lot about the higher academic kids, and I think that that's so crucial. But also making sure that our more general diploma kids who have struggled with the ECA have a way to feel successful. I think they feel very pigeonholed, and not that we've done this on purpose, but feel very pigeonholed that I don't pass a test, I'm unsuccessful. That defines me. So if we can find a way for them all to feel successful, one of the things that I have noticed through my career is just the increased amount of anxiety about the test and the inability to cope and just have a bad day and have it just be that. It was just a bad day. And I think how that translates to the career piece, if we have kids that feel successful and have these different options, then they're going to show up to work because they know how to deal with having a bad day, and they don't miss the next day of work. They know how to deal with the issues that are bogging them down. So I definitely think it's all tied together.
So Megan, in your comment, am I hearing a hint of that we should rethink how a student earns a credit?
Very much so. Very much so.
So don't just agree, expand on it now.
I have a great idea.
Well, and
then let's talk.
So one of the things that we have at our school that we have found wildly successful, and you referred to it earlier, was the JAG program. It's on a small scale, but the 40 kids that serves, it has just been an invaluable experience for them. We have a teacher that has them once a day for 2 years, and they're able to go through, and obviously would love to expand this beyond this program, but once a day for 2 years, they talk about how to shake hands, how to do an interview, how to interact with others productively, but also you're struggling in math right now, and that teacher has the ability to coordinate with that teacher some extra time to work on math. It's a very flexible thing. The kids also get credit for that class. They can end up, at our school, you get 1 credit per semester. Well, they can end up with 4 credits that go toward graduation for that class. And the confidence that has come out for those kids that they've come out of that class with, has watching it and observing it and having the benefit of being the counselor appointed to that program, I've had so many kids come in and say, JAG has made all the difference, this is why I want to be here. Well, I think that that's a good model potentially for some flexible credits that they could earn to learn some of those soft skills. The JAG teacher very much coordinates with the counselor's office, so we work on coping skills also. And they've just learned how to push through some things, but then also have those skills that help them interact with their community better, and they get credit for it. So that's one example that I have.
Haley, did you have something you wanted to add?
One way that it's just a little dent in the credits, getting things out of the way, but we allow, if you do a school sport, that's 1 credit of PE. You have to have the documentation to do it, and I've been pushing for fine arts. as well, that if you do band, color guard, or choir, that's a ton of time. And that should also be able to count for at least 1 credit. So if you're on the fine arts diploma and you have to have 2 credits to do it, or if you're on stage crew for the musicals, you know, you do 2 shows a year, there you go. You have 1 semester of credits. So yeah, having more opportunities to bring in outside experience and allowing that to count towards a diploma credit, I think would go a long way to not only knocking them out and getting people a step closer to graduation, but giving that more freedom in the day to take those exploratory classes.
The students with the flexibility that I like to consider as well are those that struggle in the academic classroom. Mm-hmm. And you know, the more we raise the bar in the core academics, and I certainly see the relevance of the rigor, but some of those students, you know, if they don't pass math, most of them aren't taking algebra till their freshman year because they're not the higher achievers that are starting it in middle school. You know, if they don't pass it the first time around, some of them not even in the second time around, by the time they're getting to their junior and senior year, they're having to take double and triple math, and in order to do that, they're losing out on those career exploration opportunities, the chance to go and participate in a CTE program where they could earn an industry certification that's going to provide them a good job opportunity. So those are the kinds of flexibility pieces that I want to keep at our forefront.
I just want to add, when you talk about that, just thinking about even teacher preparation, you're talking about think innovative. You know, why are we not having teacher preparation classes in with these employers, you know, and actually having the classes on site there so teachers can talk about these positions and just really turning the system upside down on that and think about how are we preparing our teachers and what experiences are they having so they can collaborate with the guidance counselors as partners in getting these students into different pathways. So it's also rethinking how our teachers are trained. And when you said that, it made me think of it.
A couple points. I think what can be learned by the college experience when it comes to alternative ways to get credit. And I don't know to what degree it is applicable, but certainly within experiential education opportunities in college, there is a very intentional, and this may be very similar to JAG and some other groups, a very intentional way to build in learning outcomes into that experiential learning that could be a means, and finding what's reasonable to be able to integrate within a secondary or an elementary school system. The other piece that really hasn't been touched on today that is a great learning experience outside the classroom is this concept of intercultural fluency. When I was reading over the work ethic certificate, which is fantastic, it's great work, but I see that one of the things that you want to accomplish is for students to be able to communicate clearly and do teamwork, integrating that into this intercultural kind of fluency. To what degree are they with individuals that are different from themselves? And it's race, it's gender, it's socioeconomic background. That lends and informs so much of this skill development. And it's really difficult to accomplish someone communicating clearly in teamwork if that communication and teamwork is with people just like themselves. So that intercultural piece is really important to integrate.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I wonder a little bit too about the CTE programming in high schools. I don't really understand why we can't begin that earlier. It seems like with our J. Everett Lights and some of our special facilities that where these kids can go, they can't go until they're an 11th grader. And by that time, they may have dropped out. So I'm not sure why they can't start that process much earlier in their high school career.
Well, I would suspect most superintendents would answer it's a staffing issue and just a funding issue to have, can they afford to, how many electives can you offer within your school? Those exploratory courses are outstanding, are needed, but again, going back to what Dr. McCormick was talking about, the accountability measure is in this arena. So when they have to really make hard calls, they will drop elective courses so that they can fund additional academic courses. Let me point out something else as we talk about diploma types and CTE. The academic honors diploma, wonderful diploma, but if you look very closely at it, every department in your school, there's a required course out of every department except a CTE course. It's not required. It's optional. But we require 4 years of foreign language and multiple years of academic work, but no CTE. And then, so again, so when you talk about the courses, I think it's the message that our schools hear and how they're held accountable on what courses are important. I value the CTE courses. That's my world. And if we have more exploratory courses when we talk about flexibility, that's a very important part of the flexibility, is finding a way to allow students to explore those different career opportunities, not feeling that they're choosing something that they can't get off of or can't get off of that track. If you look at it, well, in Indiana, we define a CTE concentrator as a student who has completed 6 high school credits in a sequence of courses, of similar CTE courses in a pathway course. And if you look at a student in Indiana that is a CTE concentrator, they outperform all other students on just about every accountability measure. And actually, Byron, there's a report that might be interesting, it might be important to share, maybe in the next meeting, that I referenced last meeting. It's the Indiana Career Readiness Report, which would have that data in that I think would be very relevant to today's conversation. So those courses could be and can be and are important. It's finding a way to build them into our schools, and again, that our schools could offer those types of courses. That would be my response to that. I think they would want to. I just don't know if they can.
And I was going to say, so much of our current system focuses on being a specialist in a content area. So much of our current system focuses on being a specialist in a content area, whether it's the student mastering the content on a test, whether it's promotion tenure, whatever it is. On the other hand, the business community is much more interested today on the application of that content and expected and also unpredictable ways. So I would argue that looking at more, we've heard a lot today about the importance of individualized learning, relevant learning. There's lots of learner-centered pedagogies that are extremely successful that allow students to see their education as being more relevant, keep them more engaged, attendance goes up, teacher satisfaction rates go up, and it gets us to the point that I think we're all striving at. But one of the most critical things, in my opinion, is not only making sure our students have the skills for a very uncertain future, but they have to have a love of learning. Someone made the comment that we're preparing students for careers that don't exist yet. Just recently, Google added a whole team of people that are looking for fake news or what. Well, that position, that skill wasn't even conceived 2 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So I think whatever we do in terms of the very, what I find tragic stories of these children who are having to spend their high school years studying for exams, we're killing that love of learning and their ability to adapt to a rapidly changing world that they're going to have to function in, whether it's as a member of the workforce or member of their community. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to grow and learn from other ways where we do. In Singapore, for example, students they're given a project, they have to figure out the answer to the project. If they fail, they know why they failed. They try again, so they build resilience. It's authentic assessment, and it shows that they've had to read things, put together math, understand the context of the community. So I think there's lots of things that we can learn from that will help solve or help address some of the different things that we're looking at today at a higher level.
Faye, since you've got the floor right now, could you go, we put in the packets and in the notebooks some information that you all have put together of things that are happening out there. Could you give us a little bit of just some high level of what's going on and what you're seeing? I know you brought the Singapore example in, but talk about what from your all's work that we made sure everybody had, that you had sent along, that said, hey, this would be interesting. Can you give a little bit of, I'm putting you on the spot, but could you give a little bit of a high level? What are some ideas out there, things that you're seeing that have made you go, huh?
Well, just as a little background, I'm kind of an anomaly a little bit. Kappa Delta Pi became an NGO of the United Nations in 2008, and as such, we partner with UNESCO on something called Education for Sustainable Development, or Education for Sustainability. A few states have it integrated in their standards, primarily just the state of Washington, but increasingly Maryland, Wisconsin. But my assignment with the UN is in the Asia-Pacific area. So I go to meetings a couple times a year that are held in China, but they bring in countries like from Mongolia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. And I'm just astounded at the progress they're making. They're kind of astounded that we haven't incorporated this. Canada added sustainable education into their education system about 20 years ago, Scandinavian 30 years ago. Japan, of course, they live on an island, and they've had to realize their citizenry has to live in such a way that they preserve that island, or they don't have a very good future. So I think, the examples of getting children connected with nature at an early age, if they don't have a relationship and understand that that's the world that's going to sustain them, they don't care that every tree gets cut down, that we fill our rivers with pollution. So I think we're doing our children a great disservice not helping them understand, back to that systems thinking, the interconnectedness that they have with the natural world, with one another, what they do, and their decisions in terms of lifestyle, consumption today impacts what's happening in Africa. I go to meetings, and quite honestly, we're very much resented because they said, come from a country that contributed over the last 20 years to a lot of what's happening, and we're suffering the consequences, but I don't see you trying to help mitigate that in terms of helping your children understand the importance of being a responsible global citizen. So there's lots of exemplars, there's lots of great things being done in the US in pockets, but not very much systemically. But there are certainly things that we can learn from. I don't know that it has to be a mandate or takes lots of money to make happen. There's always people, and there's wonderful educators all over our state that are eager to try something. They know what engages children. And I've always been a proponent, if you do the right things in the classroom, the test takes care of itself. So I think, it takes several years. You get some early adopters on board. They see the success. The next group comes along. But it's really using those pedagogies that are typically reserved for STEM, which is a focus of people that just get used across the curriculum, those critical thinkers. So then we're back to producing the skill set that employers work for. So it all fits together, I think, to get us where maybe we need to get in terms of focusing on the future. So I hope that answered the question.
It did. So you would add a global, what I'd call just a global citizenry piece.
Absolutely.
To that.
Absolutely, because I think if you don't understand how to balance economic, social, and environmental considerations, and there's always going to be those tensions. A great example was Standing Rock, where you have a company that's wanting to make a profit with a culture that's trying to preserve its lifestyle with the potential risk to the environment. Those are going to happen continually, and I think our children are going to have to understand, how do you balance all of those considerations and what you decide and how you live.
I kind of look at this as like an equation where you're taking skills times effort equals achievement. And I think that if we just focus solely on the skills area, we lose out on that multiplication effect of the effort that students are putting in. I've worked with some low achieving students, and some of their goals are simply to play video games. To get them to that place of actually wanting to try and wanting to achieve and wanting to put forth the effort is no small task. And it's great to have the training of being a school counselor on how to kind of dig down deep and get to the root of what's going on and when did you stop caring and why did you stop caring. I had one student who said, I asked him, we're trying to look at a solution. When's the last time you were successful, and what did you do at that time that was successful in school? And he was in high school, and it was back in, I want to say, elementary, first grade, second grade. So getting him to say, hey, at one time you were successful, and why did you get to this point? to increase the students' effort, because some of them have a learned sense of helplessness. They've quit, they've give up, they have no desire, they don't care, and to really address the effort part of a student, I think, is important, and we don't want to negate that either. We want to multiply the skills and the effort and put that together to have a great piece and a great outcome with great results. I know Martin Seligman, if I'm saying his name right, he wrote a book called Flourish, and he focused on character development. And it's like a national blueprint for educational success, and how focusing on those universal character traits like integrity, self-discipline. I mean, how many kids can't even discipline themselves to do like one little page? They'd rather go watch 3 hours of homework and be entertained. And so really, if we can somehow integrate character development and self-discipline, I think, and honesty, not cheating, not getting A's on all your assignments and then taking a test and failing because you don't know it.
Was it skills times effort equals?
Achievement.
Okay, thank you. I like that.
And I think that was from his book, so kind of stole it.
It's all right.
From a public policy perspective, how do we make that happen? Because last meeting we talked about a culture change in many ways, and what we're talking about is cultural change.
Exactly.
And how do we create that? Because we're changing or emphasizing certain core values,
Right.
which I agree to, and we're public policy makers at a statewide level. Schools historically in the United States, as you know, high schools in particular, are discipline driven. We're all in silos. We have the math department, we have the English department, we have the music department. And what we're talking about is core values permeating the entire enterprise of schools, K through 12, and certainly onto higher education. So inherently, the organization that we've created in the United States does not lend itself to cross-disciplinary kinds of things because everyone is in their silos. So my big question is, how do we change core values or enhance certain core values or emphasize core values in schools when we have this challenge of the configuration of the school? Because we're going around in circles. This is the second meeting that I've been at where we talk about soft skills or core values or whatever they are. So I'm at the point I'm convinced, but I need your help to figure out how do we get this implemented at a statewide level while still creating some flexibility.
I think that book I read was incredibly awesome. I'm like going to give a plug in for it because he laid out in there exactly like a plan on how to do it and what they did, and he was endorsed by the National Science Foundation and many different organizations. And they took it took an investment of time to train schools and train teachers, and it was across the board, and school counselors were a big part of that, I believe, and weaving it into every aspect. So it wasn't just one particular thing that was done. It was across the board, and it was a K through 12 thing. But they took time out ahead of time. They trained people. They went through the process. And as school counselors, we could be very involved in that. Like Brandy said earlier, we have the training to do that. And we could come in and somehow implement that into a school system in a way that would be effective and not just a to-do list, a box was checked. Hey, we did this little character thing.
So I want to do a follow-up question, if that's okay. How is it scalable? I'm assuming the anecdotal information in that book is in a district or a couple of districts. How do we scale that to an entire state? Because I don't know of any state that's doing this. Do you have any suggestions, or maybe other people? How do we scale that concept up?
I think the thing that we really have in our favor is that, and I don't necessarily want to speak for all school counselors, but there is definitely a very strong desire to be able to focus on that area. It is our expertise. It's what we have a passion for. It's what our training is for. But unfortunately, we have a real conflict in that my area of specialty is not test coordinating, but that's what a lot of us do. And so I think if we can put some focus on this is how we would like you to spend your time rather than doing this, we have so many evidence-based practices that we can use. We have so many measurable things that we can do that we can actually show a kind of quote-unquote product from, that we're seeing more coping skills, we're seeing higher motivation, we're seeing more drive in students. We can measure those things. Unfortunately, we don't have the resource of time to do that. So I think that that's one possibility, is if we can open up some of our time away from focusing on assessment, we would have the ability to do that.
And I don't know if it's, I'm sorry.
The first thing that I went through when you're wanting something to measure, like what data can I pull from this to show that it's effective? The first thing I immediately thought of is attendance rates and discipline. Would we see an impact in better attendance? Would we see fewer expulsions and out-of-school suspensions? Would we see fewer? All of this is reported to the state. And that's, if you're wanting like immediate raw data to show the impact of programming, that's where I see that it could be, that is already pulled and already done.
So the school counselors have competencies, and so you can vertically align K-12, and they know how to embed that. But I'd say working collaboratively with teachers, making sure that they have the professional development. I've worked with several schools, and I would say that's a lot of conversation, as they don't have maybe the skill or the confidence to embed that in their classrooms. One of the junior highs that I'm working with right now, they have an advisory, and once a week they do circles with the teachers. This is teacher-led, but counselors are helping embed social emotional learning, but teachers lead these circles, and the idea is obviously having time to spend and build relationships to do exactly what's in this work ethic. But teachers don't always feel like they've had that training. So there's a lot of professional development that needs to take place. So it's an ongoing commitment, but I think that everyone is ready to do the work. They're eager, they're excited. So I think everybody's sign us up. So the school counselors I know are ready to, again, be that support collaborator in doing that work as well.
Here and then Jason.
Well, I was just going to say there was the Chamber study back in 2014 looked at particular school counselor time use, and up to 40% of the day is often on non-counselor duties, and the piece that counselors across the board reported that was missing was that opportunity in their day to do the college and career programming and readiness. So as Randy said, the standards are there. We just need to figure out how to build the capacity.
Well, and I might put a plug in for Westfield schools, Westfield Washington schools. They have specifically hired a career readiness person at the district level. I don't know if any of you know Carol Easterday, but she's an amazing woman, and she understands that the career readiness piece can't start at 9th grade, it can't start at 6th grade, it has to start at kindergarten. And she has developed some great things with the counselors and the assistant principals in that district to bring things to the parents. Just getting the conversation started so parents understand the vocabulary to use, teaching their kids to explore, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, how can we talk about that? Because a lot of times parents aren't even using the terminology at home. So if you start with a kindergartner or a preschooler, exploring all the different possibilities, then you just build upon that each year, and that's what Carol's goal has been in Westfield, and I'm sure they're going to start to reap a lot of benefits from that in the years to come.
If I could, we have to be careful, like Jason said before, of overcorrecting, because we have a tremendous need for STEM careers. So, and we're doing a lot of good stuff. And what we need, and as the teacher, oh my goodness gracious, there's 24 hours in a day, and there are no more. As hard as I pray, God's not going to give me any more than 24 hours next Wednesday. So we simply don't have time, but the programs like JAG, where we can take these students who are not successful on those core classes and address these particular skills in a program like that where they get credit, and you could talk about cultural, you could talk about environment. There's lots of different curriculum units that you could have within that particular program, and that is a concrete solution to this problem, which stems probably because of the social skills.
In other words, leverage,
That's what we need. Is
leverage what's there, what's already out
leverage
there
what's
too,
there.
right?
And that takes funding for teachers to, and then at that point, you could have these highly skilled counselors, that you would have time for them to come in and work. You would have a boatload of time to come in for the counselors to work with those classes.
And I'm suggesting not just focusing on the low achieving students. I'm suggesting it's that foundational piece of the pathway that you're talking about that you're going to build upon. Because even your high achieving students need those skills. So like what she said, they're not flipping out and stressing out over things that really they don't need to be stressing out over. So my suggestion is in the pathway that it becomes a component that is foundational. It's a factor that all students are exposed to.
Just one quick question. We alluded to it today. We've talked about it at prior meetings when we talk about, that central theme we're hearing of flexibility. Since there's so many counselors in the room, is there any concern about with that flexibility comes manageability? And, especially for small rural schools with maybe have a single or a couple counselors to be able to manage those multiple pathways. Is that a concern? And if so, how can we design something that will be doable from the counselor's perspective?
I think it definitely is a concern. I think that we would have to utilize our resources within whichever community we're in. Going back to the comments earlier about coordinating with the businesses within your community and seeing if you can collaborate with them to provide some programming. If they're looking for workers, we have people that could potentially be those, but how can we collaborate to make that happen? That could be a resource that we could use. I think, yes, there's always a manageability concern. We struggle a little bit now, so I'm not sure that it's not going to necessarily be a new struggle, but if it's more productive and better for our students and better for the community, again, I don't want to speak for all the counselors, but I guess we'll do what we need to do because we struggle a little bit now.
And some of the stuff that they're suggesting too, it is there, and that's what, I guess maybe instead of flexibility, the if I could speak, individuals, meeting them that way. With the ECA it being a pathway, if those students pass that, they've met their diploma, they still got to meet the other ones. Coming up with different ways for them to meet them becomes the manageability, right? So being able to meet them as individuals, Jason's point is well taken. There are students that need 4 years of math, and I need to know that. Not just so they can graduate, but so that they can get into engineering school. I mean, school counselors as professionals, staying up to that and getting the professional development to understand all the needs, that this student needs to have chem and physics to even be considered. That's all part of it, but that's why, one of the things that the test does do, it allows us, okay, they've completed that diploma readiness. Now, how do we meet them differently if they haven't after they take it? And then, again, still going back to the individuals and meeting them. The ratios for counselors is concerning. It definitely needs addressed. My school is a benefit for their ratios, but it doesn't mean that we should service students differently just because of those ratios. It just means that we need some of the flexibilities to have those programs.
Byron, I just want to say, first off, thank you for framing this conversation such that we're finally starting to dig in on what we mean by flexibility, since it's a word that's come up numerous times. I wrote down in my paper flexibility from what and for what, and if I could just summarize what I think I've heard to see if I've missed anything. So in the from what category, and if there are more concrete examples, I think that'd be really helpful to informing this group's discussions moving forward. What I think I heard in terms of concrete from what, it was more flexible around our current assessment options and math requirements. And then in the for what category, what I think I heard was alternative options for demonstrating competency, earning credits, and more flexibility for intentional exploration, experiential learning. Are there any big ticket items that I'm missing from this conversation? And please tell me, because I'd like to know. I bet Lindsay's got some ideas.
Jason, if I can just piggyback on that, the one thing I think that we don't have flexibility from, and you, higher ed, whether this panel has no control over the fact that to get into a dental school, it may require a student to have straight A's. I mean, the fact is it is a very competitive. To get into specific schools they want to get into, we don't control that. And And even the Commission for Higher Ed, I mean, Commissioner Lubbers has no, sorry.
I think she's senator for life.
Yeah. Has no control over setting what Purdue University or Notre Dame University, Rose-Hulman, any of those requirements, as well as institutions beyond the state border. So I think as we look at things, we need to think about flexibility that we have control over. And we do have control over assessments. And as we started the discussion today, we said ECAs are, as I read it, those are options. They are not set in law that has to be there. But it is in federal law that we're going to have to take those assessments. And we do not have the ability to say, we don't care about federal law. We have to, so there are things we're going to have to live within. And some of those things are controlled by policy, and some of them are controlled by, outside entities that we have no control of impacting. So
I think that's absolutely right.
Thank you. He hates it when I do this, but Mike, did you get the for what and the from what and the for what? Jason, will you say those one more time? Because I think that was I appreciate the fact that you brought us to that.
It's the only way I can keep myself sane.
I needed that myself.
So in the from what category, what I heard was flexibility around assessments and math requirements, with the caveat that Representative Benny had that there are some things that, no matter whether Byron makes us kings or emperors for a day, we just don't have the flexibility we necessarily want in all those areas. And then the for what I think I heard from my colleague to the right, but also just generally, was alternative options for demonstrating competency or earning credits, and broad category of more intentional exploration and experiential learning. I didn't say this really, but it seems to me what I've heard is it sounds like it could take any number of forms, from work-based, project-based, service-based, but it seems like there's a real appetite. We certainly heard from the students last week, but it seems around this table too, is alternative ways for students to gain those skills beyond what it appears to be their flexibility to do so now. Is that fair?
Thank you, Jason. And now, since it is, unfortunately, it is my task to keep us on time, so I'm going to do that. And Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot now. You're going to get 5 minutes to give us what happened today at a high level. Now, as has become our custom here, we will be going around the table after Mike's review, and you need to give us your big value takeaway from today. What do you really value? What do you want us to move forward with, a value that we have from today? Okay? And so each person has the opportunity to do that at the end. It's our way of making sure that every person does have the last word, and that you do have a chance to say what's on your mind, say what you really value from today's discussion. So, Mike, this is what you do. Take it away. Loudly.
Beginning with this point of Dr. Ernest reminding us that student success is something that we're all focused on. So as far as our guiding North Star, everybody keeping that in mind. This concept of flexibility, which again we circle back to, but from the public comment, really hearing that one size does not fit all. Really being mindful of kids who need remediation, or maybe the first ones in their family to be graduating. There's many types of students, many types of schools. We heard something about local control. How do we make sure that the students have the choices they need to be what they want to spend time and run with their passions and what they're good at? This concept of a single diploma, there's a lot of conversation about the ECA in particular as a single assessment. Do we really want that to be the single hurdle? How do we value and meet the needs of those who are having extreme difficulty with that particular hurdle? Really looking at this concept of different types of skills. So what are the opportunities for acquiring these skills in high school? Really looking at something that's maybe been lost. So something like shop class, new opportunities for internships and job training. You learn by doing. So really trying to say, well, how do you institutionalize that? What might these stackable experiences look like? What could it look like if we have a foundation? And then stackable experiences create the pathway that you want to be a part of that. Still headed toward this diploma, potentially with distinctions, and also just hearing that this is something that in the United States has been proven. This is what people want. We don't want sort of a base pipeline of now this requirement, now this one. We want a broader base sense of education. And so how do we reorient to share resources and costs to reflect that value? Also this point again about equity of access across abilities and across geographies. Next, sort of two main points here. So the employer survey and then the work ethic certificate. The bottom line here is that employers are desperate for workers who are qualified to do the jobs that they have. Right now, 47% of those jobs are unfilled due to the applicant pool being underqualified. The other point is that the workforce demand is increasing, and so between those two dynamics, there's an enormous gap here we need to fill. Employers in general say, hey, get the kid a diploma and we'll train them in the job that we want them to do, to perform. It would be great if they had skills ready to go, but they're prepared for the fact that very often they have to learn on the job. We started to talk about what are those basic skills. Job-specific skills, education-specific like math, soft skills, things like collaboration, communication, a good work ethic, good attitude. This thought about critical thinking and systems thinking, does that become something that's covered in school? Do you learn that in math? What are potential multidisciplinary student or community learning projects to actually start to dig into that? Some examples already exist. This isn't an either or. These are all things that we need to be successful. The point was brought up, don't overcorrect. We can't go so far in one direction that we're creating a new problem the other way. Talking about teachers in particular, how do we make sure that we're addressing this whole system? So this isn't just about students, it isn't just about employers, it's about teachers, it's about legislators, it's about parents, it's about communities. And how do we make sure that we're involving everyone in this conversation? Test preparation in particular came up time and time again. How do we give teachers that creative space and the time to be able to do what they're good at, what they know how to do? Not losing that spark, so the moment that students start to see and take ownership of their own future. The entire system. Moving on to the work ethic. How does a good work ethic develop? Is this something that we can potentially create a course for? Can we learn this from classes? We certainly don't learn it, as we heard from somebody saying, have a better work ethic. What does it mean to actually have buy-in from everybody involved? So again, employers, students, teachers, how do you incentivize a good work ethic? Let's see. How do we capture and share the learning? So the work that we're doing on this, how do we make sure that that's something that as a group we learn from that? And potentially share beyond. It was mentioned that potentially this is a piece of that foundation, so as we're thinking through what does education look like, maybe this is part of that foundation. We say everybody needs to have some work in this area. We talked about how this is not just high school, this is something that has to start very early, again, something we heard over and over. How do we make sure this is consistent across many dimensions we're looking at? Okay, so that there. Finally, I sort of made this model based on what I was hearing. It's really this conversation of, well, what is flexibility, what is flexibility not? What do we mean by that? I'd say this model keeps coming up again and again, and I'm sort of doing different versions of it, but this academic track and the way we talk about how does a student maybe potentially imagine what a university is looking for, and then start to say, I need to take more EP class, I need to get A's in everything, and maybe losing the big picture for sight of that. And so what does this academic track look like in their mind? How do we think about it? How do we value this? And then how do we start to think about what something more expansive might look like? So the way I drew this, the way I was hearing it was, potentially there's these other experiences that surround and prop up that academic experience. This whole thing is something like learning. And so how do we intentionally approach this? How do we change from maybe what currently exists to something else? How do we value and incentivize those expansive experiences? Things like intercultural fluency, and the ability to collaborate with others who are coming from a different time and place. Extracurriculars, can you potentially give credit for those? Work experience and CTE, music and art, soft skill development. What does it mean for us to truly value those the way that maybe the world does or employers do? How do we get a sense of what that is, and then how do we start to change our system to reflect that? This is a significant cultural change. Again, brought that up from last week. Again, start early. This is something that starts in kindergarten or you're too late. Students need many different types and levels of support. Every student is different. What do we mean by character? Things like integrity, self-discipline, and honesty. Social emotional learning is a piece. That's something that's part of an education intentionally. And then really talking about teachers and counselors. This is work that they're already great at, they're trained in, this is what they want to be doing. How do we make sure that we give them the ability and the space to do that? How do we help them, help students find their pathways? How do we prepare teachers for this? Things like time, resources, collaborative work with them to design this with them, professional development. It's an integrated implementation process. How do we refocus the system to measure what we want it to be measuring? It was mentioned as a possible model, maybe by flexibility we mean something like the opposite end of a seesaw for requirements. So as requirements become sort of deeper and more specific, does that take flexibility out of the system? There was some question about, well, how much flexibility do we need? How much exists now? What are we afraid of losing based on further requirements? I'll just also mention that STEM was brought up in the critical thinking that STEM tries to engender and is working on and focusing on. Things like the ability to adapt, resilience, application of knowledge. STEM obviously has both the hard sort of science side to it, but also recognizing that that's useless unless you figure out how to apply it and how to use it critically in practice to make it your own. Okay, thanks.
Take a breath. Thank you, Mike. So with our values, we will start over here. BJ Watts, you'll give our first, then we'll go to your right.
I always pick a couple because I never choose one. But I think the biggest things for me today were the certificate needs to be a K-12. When we're talking about building those soft skills in kids, I'm a little biased as an elementary school teacher, but I think if we build those skills early, it eliminates a lot of concerns and a lot of problems and a lot of issues that we may have at the junior high or senior high level if those skills are built in. They're obviously maintained throughout grade 12, but I think promoting them and instilling them in the elementary level is the biggest key. And the second take for me today is, I think ECAs, personal opinion, I think ECAs are an option and should be an option. But what we have to figure out is, okay, if we don't pass, if that student doesn't pass that ECA, and he probably is not going, I'm not saying all, but, and we know that he's not going to, what options do we create for him that are still rigorous, that allow him to experience success and work towards success, as opposed to spending his time in remediation? What's the best way to spend his time that's relevant to what skills he's going to need, he or she is going to need to be successful?
I think my takeaway is even more of an appreciation for the complexity of finding that balance between soft skills and the need for strong academic preparation. In my world, the feedback I get back from employers who are seeking to recruit a college-educated workforce are some of the same concerns about soft skills. As a matter of fact, your work ethic pieces actually mirror what competencies are established, especially through career centers around the country, frankly. So we know soft skills is the issue, but that strong academic preparation to really fuel that high-level STEM-fueled workplace that employers are seeking out from that, finding that balance, getting a sense of what is the flexibility that's essentially going to be defined to allow that to happen. It's a complicated issue, but I also know that the solution are sessions like this and involvement of people from diverse backgrounds. The key is listening, reflection, and frankly, some analytical reasoning relating to that.
I would just, keep echoing on bulbous building blocks. I just want to emphasize that school counselors really are vital partners in this work, and just to emphasize that social emotional really needs to be integrated throughout the K-12 curriculum. And as someone that teaches graduate students, I still see needs at the social emotional learning level for graduate students. So I can't emphasize the need to really go back and really start focusing on social emotional learning principles.
The pathways that we develop need to be valued equally and valued within a school culture equally, within the students' minds, within parents, within the community at large. And I think we need to guard against developing a pathway that we send messages, whether it's directly or indirectly, that is the better pathway, and others are second options.
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, my value remains the same as the past two meetings, which is equity, both in terms of the expectations we set for students, but also the opportunities we provide for them to be successful. But I guess my takeaway from this meeting is, or maybe it's really more of a challenge for the group, is under this umbrella of flexibility, what alternative metrics or safeguards can we put in place to assure both parents and policymakers that greater flexibility will result in what we really want to see, which is increased opportunity and better outcomes for our students? I don't know that we got to an answer to that today, but I think we're starting to head down that path.
Something that I found to be very important that I'm glad was not outright rejected was the importance of support systems in order to implement any of these changes. And particularly the guidance counselors brought this up again. But even as teachers, we didn't get a chance to touch on this, but I think that teachers would value more time to work collaboratively and coach as well, not just stick to the content in the classrooms. But we need to have the support to increase staffing so that we can go out to businesses and collaborate, so we can work with advisements, we can work with the counselors. But the support has to be there for counselors and teachers to do that.
I'm going to go back to my formula. So I don't think it's like 1 + 1, skills plus effort equals, this 2. I think if we take them and multiply them, we will have a greater outcome. We will have that 2 × 2 is 4 if we combine them and we don't have to separate one from the other. And we will have that multiplication effect that we're actually looking for, and students will achieve and they will be successful.
I would say with this idea of balance that we're striving for, and that idea that there's a place for everybody and everybody has a place, that as we have the flexibility to try to move toward that counselors are definitely on board and wanting to be part of that equation. And we have a lot of expertise to lend, and we would love to be able to do that. And if we have the refocus of being able to open up some time for us to do that, I think what Brandy said earlier, we're all in. So.
I agree with Jason. I want to be careful not to autocorrect. There's good things that are happening here, and I don't want to lose sight in that when we talk about all of it. ECA creates a pathway. So there's one. What else do the other pathways look like? And they do need to be manageable. I mean, there can't be so many that we lose everybody in confusion. But the other thing I want to do is just encourage or kind of challenge it to not be viewed as a 4-year, this is when it has to happen in high school. If we don't have middle schools on board and elementaries and higher education and employers, not all can be accomplished at 4 years. We're meeting those kids. They're coming to us from all different preparations, different things. So it really has to be a collaborative effort or we'll lose it.
First time you asked me this, I said opportunity, and I'm not going to budge too far from opportunity, maybe a little bit into the word like options. I think our students need to have options. They need to have tactile, kinesthetic opportunities to see different careers and internships and opportunities that they have regardless of where they come from in the state of Indiana.
2 bullet points. Number 1, on behalf of the hundreds of students I've helped try to pass those math ECAs, thank you for this discussion. It is an important discussion. I just appreciate that. Number 2 is I am totally taken aback by Mike's whiteboard skills. I am in awe of this man.
You asked what flexibility would look like to me, and I teach the Project Lead the Way biomedical sciences, and sometimes by their sophomore year they don't want to be medical, but they're limited of what they can finish on that pathway because we're a small school, just eligibility. So maybe some of these first year pathway classes could maybe overlap. We talked about stackability. Would that work?
I guess I have 3 points. First I have to say that I was very naive coming into this conversation. I was thinking we would be able to add 2 or 3 pathways to help, kind of provide some flexibility for non-college bound students, and we could check that off the list. But after hearing kind of the richness of the discussion and the input, the interface that the graduation pathways have with diploma, with standards, with assessment, with our K-8 structure, with culture, I mean, this is huge, and I can only say I'm glad I'm not the one doing the graphic artist work back here, trying to keep all of these pieces together. One of my other takeaways today came from someone over there, and I think it's a value statement. You know, as students begin to envision their future, how do we create a learning environment that makes that learning relevant to them, that's individualized to them, as well as adaptable to their changing vision through time? And then my last thing, I guess, is a request. I would love people around this table that are much smarter than I to bring in some model, stackable experiences that bring together both that rigor and flexibility that we continue to talk about. And I'd love to see that, because I think, you know, the visual of that would be very, very helpful. And I think other folks around the table may have some ways of putting that together.
I would like to echo what you said. I really appreciated the conversation today and love that we had so much public comment, and it got me to thinking, one, it's got me worried because we have really a huge task ahead of us. You kept calling it, what do you call this, a monster?
Mountain.
A mountain.
Respect the mountain.
Respect the mountain. Jeff Studebaker today said something, I'm going to butcher it because he was talking so fast, but he said something like, our mission is to prepare every single student to walk their path to success. So that kind of has stuck with me through today's conversation. And you were asking for examples of stackable experiences. So my takeaway today was similar. How do we lend value to experiences? Those are individual student experiences. How do we lend value? And then the other question I'm walking away with that I got to think about is, how do we ensure that there's a quality to those experiences if we're going to think about putting them in a pathway? So those are my takeaways.
Being an elementary teacher and spending most of my career in the primary grades, I would just encourage us all to remember we're talking about 4 to 17-year-olds, basically, age-wise. These are kids. They have brains that will not be fully developed when they walk out of high school, particularly the male brain. We know that the male brain does not, it's not a slam, it's legitimate, I promise. In the data, it tells us, you know, a male brain is not fully developed and matured until it's in its 20s. So I think there is an element here that we have to respect. Yeah, my husband's 52, let's see. But we have to respect that brain research and looking at what really is developmentally appropriate at whatever stage we're talking about. Are we talking about that, the soft skill, very beginning soft skill stages? Are we talking about the exploratory phases? Are we talking about an opportunity phase? Wherever we are, we need to be talking about brain research, developmentally appropriate, social and emotional appropriate practices and structures that are in place. And then I think how policymakers could really help would be changing the conversation from college and career ready to career ready, and then putting an emphasis, a balanced emphasis, on the entire curriculum so that the entire child is really considered, whatever their interests, whatever sparks their imagination. I think if you do that, then you have elementary teachers who suddenly don't feel nearly as pressured. You have administrators not feeling nearly as pressured to focus only on reading and math, and teachers not feeling so pressured to focus only on reading and math, and instead they're weaving back in again the social studies experiences that once brought career exploration and opportunity to kids as young as 4 and 5 in a kindergarten. So developmentally appropriate, social emotional learning, brain research, consider that these are still young developing brains, and how can we best support them in seeking their future career.
My first takeaway is the invited guests who are here. And there's so much wisdom throughout the state of Indiana. Seriously, last meeting we had students, and I was just sitting back amazed at the wisdom that they had. And then I thought about it. They're living everyday systems that we're creating. And so thank you if you're an invited guest today. It's really been helpful. My second takeaway is one word: balance. And we're trying to balance a whole host of different things. The example is flexibility in high standards. We all want flexibility, and we all want high standards. So what's the right balance for that? I don't think we're talking about flexibility where we don't have any standards, we don't have any accountability, we don't have anything. It's just a set of do what you want to do at the local level. I don't think we're talking about that. So that balance of flexibility and high standards is really important. And my last one is the complexity of what we're doing. In some respects, I feel like I'm on a ship that's adrift, and the tides are taking us in different ways. And probably at this early stage, that's okay because we're gathering information. But at some point, we're going to have to right the ship and put us in a policy direction. And in doing that, someone mentioned systems approach. And what we do at a policy level affects multiple levels, affects all sorts of other things. So how to create a set of recommendations and then policy and then maybe legislation with our colleagues that does not create unintended consequences that are negative for all of you and all of us. So the complexity is still a big issue, and I think we have to keep in mind that systems approach. What will the system look like? Will they be interconnected components working together? And I think that's really important.
First of all, I just want to thank you all for spending your morning with me. I learned so much, a couple things that come out. I think about when you asked about how do we earn credits, and I think about how that's changed with some of the adult learning programs and folks going back to school, and then is there a place for us to learn from that and apply it to our K-12 world? I also heard the comment, I think it was Alan, that really kind of posed the question to us about the CTE not being required in the core 40 and thinking about there's an opportunity for us to change about how we're talking about this in the conversation we're having, how we're engaging teachers with their school counselor counterparts, how we're engaging teachers with employers. And so for me, I just leaving today with just the validation that the critical importance for us to build a vision for our state around career pathways for all students, right? Some of the traditional and non-traditional, kind of as a system. We think about Faye talking about systems as a system for delivering the skills that's needed for our students.
Well, I think one of the things came out with really appreciate the teachers and counselors that are here today. But I forget who said it, but to get the students excited and to get them kind of motivated that they want to do this, they like this, and so they want to pursue this. And I think they do better then when they have that level of excitement. And the exploration kind of goes along with that. And so I think that's a big part of it, and we need good counselors. So I think the career coach side of a counselor, I think, is vitally important, what we're talking about here. And I think we do need more counselors in our schools as well in Indiana to get that job done right.
I just greatly appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you as well and to learn. It certainly informs a lot of what I'm doing, but I was very appreciative of the focus on the student, the multiple ways that we help students be successful, that we're not just focusing on college readiness, but we're embracing the importance of vocational and technical education and the valuable role that plays, looking at rigor and relevance, but there's multiple ways of delivering it, I thought was an important part of our discussion. And very much, keeping equity in mind, how do you integrate flexibility and autonomy to facilitate learning and engage all the different stakeholders? I think the comments about bringing in parents and business partners and community partners, it takes a village to prepare. Education is here to serve the community in which it's embedded, and so I think you have everybody together, just like you're doing at these meetings, is very, very important. And at the end of the day, I love the idea that we're developing the whole child so that each and every one of them are wildly successfully and well adjusted.
I've been blown away by so many things today, and the public comments and just from teachers and counselors, and Faye, it's amazing how I'm going to say two things that you said. It doesn't surprise me that we're on the same page a little bit here. But balance was where I was going, and a lot of people have gone to that, and I was kind of imagining myself on a balance beam, and now that I've given you all a really bad image for you to think about. But it comes down to three old things that we think about, and these to me are still very important. rigor, relevance, and relationship. And we talked about that balance of, well, gosh, somebody said something in public comment about having such rigorous courses that then we don't have them relevant. I say, why, those two are not mutually exclusive, right? We should have relevance with our rigor and rigor with our relevance. And so to me, that's the big takeaway, is that we have to continue to do that and really balance that. And then the relationship comes in. That's how we do, in a lot of cases, build the work ethic, and that piece is that relationship with the teacher. Carol talked about it. I used to do that with my students every day. They shook my hand. It's amazing what you can find out about a kid, what happened the night before, from shaking their hand and telling them hello, right? And so I think that's an important, so rigor, relevance, and relationship. Bob?
I think everybody brings a lot of great points. I think probably the biggest thing I had was the fact that it's all about career. It's not college and or career, it's career. And if we really focus on that, I think we really get to the end game. I reflect back about, I talked about the meeting we had in Batesville on August 15th. And I think so often, and also about what was said, Alan said about the fact that academic honors do not include any career tech classes. And I think the reality is, in our country, kids look at career tech programs as really, many times they'll say it's for the losers. In fact, when we were in Batesville, I was going to reference a minute ago that their comment was from Hillenbrand Industry is so often education looks at career tech programs for kids that are more remediation type programs. And I mean, there's even a lot of discussion kind of about how these kids may not have the academic ability to be successful and more rigorous. And the reality is we need to be looking at all of those kids need some of those skills and some of those things. We need to be developing those. Hillenbrand Industry doesn't need people who are, they need the factory workers, but they also want to develop those CEOs, and the career tech programs can help develop those future leaders. And unfortunately, I don't always think we look at it that way, but we really ought to be looking at a career path and not necessarily college or career.
Well, obviously, I could ditto what a lot of the wise folks here in the room have already said. Just a couple of things that struck me a little bit differently or that haven't been articulated is, I guess, on the notion of balance. I liked the idea of don't overcorrect, but I'm balancing that with the notion of preparing our students for careers that don't currently exist. And it brought me to an article that I have done some work with recently on forecasting the future of K-12 by KnowledgeWorks. And it occurred to me that I want to walk away, and as I'm thinking about this entire issue, I want to stay, not necessarily find a solution to our current problem, but I want to be very cognizant of looking for a solution to the problem that is to come, because we're preparing students to respond to an industry need, but those students aren't going to be in that industry for several years. And so the more future focused we can stay in our thinking, I would like to see us move ahead of the game as much as we can.
Thank you. I do not know how anyone can walk away from this and not be excited about the future that we have. And I appreciate the fact, just last remark here, and Dave, you brought it up, that, yes, it's a little messy, right? But I think that's the right way. I think too many times we convene and we already have problem solving going on as opposed to listening. And I personally have been very committed to that we are going to, in these first four, we're listening and taking notes and thinking through what are the possibilities. And I appreciate the fact that everybody's been on board with that. And I appreciate the fact that you came today with those kind of thoughts for that, so that we're solving what's the next thing down the road, right? And I think that's important. So with that, I'm going to call us adjourn. Notebooks can stay for panel members. Those will be back for you. Collaborators, we will continue to keep you involved. We have lots of things that we're working on for that, even a last time where we bring you all back together. So again, thank you very much. We stand adjourned.